Hello. It looks like there may be some Twitch issues, which hopefully resolve themselves. That's my hope. Good morning and welcome to the coffee chat stream with me, Dr. Rachel Tappan. My stream slash, I guess if you're listening to this as a podcast slash YouTube channel, are for anybody who cares about language technology and other people. And that's what we're gonna talk about today. So as usual, we will separate it by topic, starting with some research. So EMNLP acceptances went out this week. So we're going to talk about some EMNLP papers. I think there's one Coling paper, a couple preprints. And then we'll talk about professional stuff, which is what I've renamed the practical heading that I was using before, because really it's things that, you know, I care about as a language technologist. Luke, hello, welcome. And then, as always, we're going to talk a little bit about politics, various stuff that's happening. Not a whole bunch today, but it is, in fact, happening. Okay, and it looks like Twitch has fixed itself. Fabulous. Love to see it. And ethics, various news stories on, you know, machine learning systems that I think have strong ethical implications. And then finally, as always, we'll end with a little bit of something fun, just to end on a high note, because we always talk about some, well, not always, but generally we end up talking about some pretty heavy stuff. So I want to make sure that we don't just, you know, only talk about depressing things. I don't think that is particularly healthy or helpful for anyone. So I'm going to take just a second to see if I can't fix something on my end. So if you haven't already gotten your coffee and it is a coffee drinking time and you are a person who is a coffee drinking person, now might be a good time to get that. I do have my coffee. The mug says coffee and IPA. And yes, the handle is broken. It's been for a while. I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm going to keep using it. It works. It holds liquid. And there's no call to throw away something that's perfectly functional. All right, and this really quickly. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I am very tired. This week has been an absolute gauntlet, and it's not done yet and won't be for a while. So that's where I am. Sorry, I'm trying to fix a video issue here, and I'm trying to focus on two things at once, which is always challenging. I think that's about as good as it's gonna get. So let's hop in right away with research now that we've dithered for a couple minutes. So the first paper we have is it's a news article from Nature. So if you're not familiar with scientific publishing, Science and Nature are the two fanciest journals. And they are cross-disciplinary journals. So they have content from many different disciplines. And Abeba Burhain, who we've talked about so much on the channel, she does really, really fantastic work. I think she originally started in cognitive science, but she's also done a lot of work in computer vision and machine learning and AI ethics in general, and you know, great researcher, seems like a cool person, has a article in the news and views section of Nature. And the title of the article is "The Unseen Black," B is capitalized there, Faces of AI Algorithms. An audit of commercial facial analysis tools found that dark-skinned faces are misclassified at a much higher rate than our faces from any other group. So that is the Gender Shades project, if you're familiar with that, which I believe was originally done by Joy Bulamwini and Timnit Gebru. 4 years on, the study is shaping research, regulation, and commercial applications. Yes, by Joy, that is last name spelled Buolamwini, and Timnit Gebru, Timnit space Gebru, both of whom I would say are very well-known researchers in the field of AI ethics. And so it's a discussion of what has happened in the 4 years since. Can I help you? I have a blanket on my lap because it's chilly here today, and my dog is pulling it off my lap. for him. No, it's mine. And Rung says he observed the same thing while building facial recognition systems in 2018. Yeah, it seems to be a persistent problem, sort of similar to biases against groups of speakers in computer and automatic speech recognition systems. Seems to continue to persist. Yeah. Is it healthy to drink coffee in the evening? I mean, I guess it depends on your caffeine tolerance. I can't usually have any after 3-ish in the afternoon if I want to sleep well, but I think it's up to you as an individual. I know that it's very common to drink coffee even quite late at night in Nordic countries, in Europe, for example, but I can't. Yeah, so it's a sort of a popular science, non-technical introduction to the gender state study, and then the work on, let me get that out of the way, the work on, in general, bias in systems that has persisted since then. So I'll pop the link to this in chat if any of you would like to read it. If you're not familiar with this research, I think it's a helpful thing to read, and also just, but nice to see it in Nature, which, again, very prestigious publication venue. So great article. Thank you for writing it, Beba, and cheers. Congratulations. All right, next up. So this is not a paper. This is one of those publication by press release things that I am frustrated with, usually frustrated with. In this case, however, I'm less upset about it. So this is from the Chan Zuckerberg Institute Initiative Science. So the nonprofit, I guess, I'm assuming it's a nonprofit, the tax break founded by Mark Zuckerberg and his spouse, that they put a lot of money into. And in this case, they have released a data set that I think is actually pretty useful. So I will read the title. It is New Data Reveals the Hidden Impact of Open Source in Science. And the dataset is the CZ Software Mentions dataset, a dataset entirely composed of software mentions mined from the scientific literature. So it's an NLP project looking at what packages people talked about using in their papers. And I will say, I think there's probably pretty big, I think there's probably some bias here in what, packages people talk about using, right? Like, if I'm doing a statistical analysis in a paper, I'm not going to say, I use tidyverse for the data cleaning, and then, Procrustes beta by so-and-so for the, a topological analysis or whatever I was doing. Still, I think an interesting paper. It pulls from 3.8 million papers from the open access biomedical literature collection by PubMed Central and 16 million full text papers made available to CZI from publishers. And that's a big deal because usually scientific publishers are not especially forthcoming with free versions of their papers, which is part of the reason why arXiv exists, so that people who are working in the field can see preprints of things that have been published by scientific publishers. And I'd say the use of it has sort of shifted in the field to be more focused on being the initial publication venue itself. But yes, so it's a great big data set. Obviously can be very helpful for folks who are interested in, quantifying the impact of open source, particularly people who are running open source projects and arguing that they should get money. Although I would say that if you are not really working in the biomedical field at all, I think that you may be underrepresented in this data set, but yeah. So that's that. Just seems like an interesting thing to use if you are working in this domain. All right, next up. So this is what arXiv is used for. So this is a published paper. I am referencing the arXiv version here because the published paper I would have to pay for, and I do not have that in the budget right now. They are not cheap. But the authors have made this paper available. So the paper is Don't Take It Personally, Analyzing Gender and Age Differences in Ratings of Online Humor. And I believe it was published at a conference I'm not super familiar with that's more on sort of like computational sociology. And the authors are J.A. Meany, that is Meaney, Stephen R. Wilson, Louis, Chiruzo, and Walid Magdi. Again, apologies if I mispronounce anybody's names. Always feel free to correct me. And yes, so I thought this was particularly interesting because, well, to me, hopefully you think it's interesting. One of my big research areas in graduate school was on perception, right? And particularly like a very low level, like phonological perception, but also I think in, a computational linguistics, computer-human interaction context in general, perception can be a little bit more difficult to study than production, which is the other thing that is not perception. Those are usually how people divide the language questions, because for production, you can just, people do just grab data, language data from the net, but for perception, you have to ask people. So I did perceptual work for my dissertation, and it was a big focus of my work. And in this case, it's much more high level than what I was working at. So they were specifically looking at how different, so they were looking at gender and age differences. So how people from different genders and different age cohorts react to online humor. I'll read the abstract now. Computational humor detection systems rarely model the subjectivity of humor responses or consider alternative reactions to humor, namely offense. We analyzed a large, no, it's my blanket. Sorry, I'm wrestling with my dog. We analyze a large data set of humor and offense ratings by male and female annotators of different age groups. We find that, so they were only looking at two genders. We find that women link these two concepts more strongly than men, and they tend to give lower humor ratings and higher offense scores. We also find that the correlation between humor and offense increases with age. Although there were no gender or age differences in humor detection, women and older annotators signaled that they did not understand joke texts more often than men. We discussed implications for computational humor detection and downstream tasks. Robbie says rating, not reacting. Oh, did I misread something? Offensive ratings. Consider alternative reactions. So I guess as perhaps your point is that what they are measuring are these, ratings and not how people reacted to the humor, which I think it's a fair point. So this is definitely a thing that has been of interest to folks working in NLP for a while, and I think particularly for folks that don't have much of a linguistics or much of a social science background, I have noticed in the field of NLP research, and frankly, machine learning research generally, the idea of ground truth, golden labels, that this thing is that or this, and not really always considering things like context, things like the social situation in which this may be used. And I get it; those things are hard and difficult to consider. And definitely add complexity to your work, but I think that also makes it a more, ecologically valid discussion of different phenomena. Yes, so basically they're pointing out like, hey, we know that various demographic variables modulate responses to humor. It has been difficult to incorporate such, I'm reading here, demographic awareness into their tasks, and instead tend to average overall humor ratings, which removes nuance and subjectivity from the data, as well as possibly decreasing the generalizability of the humor detection systems. TP Rototype, I apologize if I'm saying that wrong, says, how do they measure humor? So I believe what they are specifically asking folks to do here is to fill in a survey rating. So annotators were asked if the intention of the text was to be humorous. So like just up, down. This binary response question was aimed at gauging the genre of the texts, and annotators were asked not to judge based on whether they found it funny, but whether it contained indicators of this humor genre, e.g. a setup and punchline, puns, absurd content, etc. If the annotator selected yes, they were then asked to rate how funny they found it on a scale of 1 to 5. There was also the option to select I don't get it if the text was identified as humorous, but the humor was not understood. If the annotator selected no, they were not asked any further questions about this text. And then the measures for offense, I'm still reading here. If the text had been labeled as humorous, annotators were asked if they thought the text targeted a group simply because they belonged to that group, or if they thought the text would be offensive to a large number of people. In the case of a yes response, they were asked generally how offensive they thought the text was from 1 to 5. And then within that, if a text had been labeled as humorous, we asked annotators if they were personally hurt by the text or were hurt on someone else's behalf, and if so, to rate how much from 1 to 5. Gahaku says, knock knock jokes do not compute. So yeah, I think it's a great question to ask. Oh, it probably actually says T prototype, and yeah, prototype is a much more common word than rototype. Hey, reading is hard, and I am not being glib about that. It genuinely is. Yes, so they're basically asking people for their judgments, and 5-point scale is pretty common, and generally you'll see, survey design is very difficult. I don't know if any of you have ever done a lot of reading in the survey design literature. There's a lot of research that has been done on it, and I would recommend that if you're interested in survey design, you read some like introductory texts on how to design surveys. But in general, I think this is a reasonable survey instrument given what they are looking for. And then they also wanted to make sure that they had shared cultural knowledge between all of their annotators, which I think is great. All annotators were native English speakers and citizens of the United States. I may personally have narrowed that pool even more given regional differences within the United States, but that does reduce your number of potential participants, and I am not insensitive to the fact that that is challenging. Yeah. The prototype is what it's short for. I hope it makes it easier. Thank you, helpful. On a serious note, any NLP applications for creating jokes? Yes, lots of them. They tend to be just sort of so-so, at least in my experience. Yes, so computational humor studies is like a field, and this paper is sort of reacting to work in that field, being like, hey, who is reading the joke is going to affect how funny they see it. Actually, one of my cohort mates in graduate school did, Rick Konchal-Kodzorski did work on puns and automating puns using, this was before transformers were a thing, using embedding techniques. Let's see if I can get that paper really quick. And I'm not saying that this is like the only only research. It's just a paper I happen to know off the top of my head. Yeah, so the paper is phonological pun understanding, and he was second author, Aaron. One sec. I can just show you all the links. So the paper that I am referring to here is Phonological Pun Understanding by Aaron Jaech, Rick Konchal-Kodzorski, and Mari Ostendorf, all from the University of Washington. I'll post the link in the chat as well. But yes, I think this is just sort of helpful as a breadcrumb, because you can look at what cited it and what it has cited to sort of start to get an idea of the structure of the literature. Although obviously this came out in 2016, so it is not going to be transformer or large language model based, and I guess question mark to what degree it's still relevant for current work in the field. Where were we? Yes. So Yes. And then they talk about the statistics that I'm not going to go into unless y'all really care. Yeah, that looks good to me. I'm just skimming. Yes. So, general questions they had. Overall, there was a small negative correlation between humor and general offense, and this grew stronger for humor and personal offense, right? So if a joke was offensive to everyone, the more likely someone was to rate the joke was offensive to a group of people, the less humorous it was, the more likely someone was to rate a joke as offensive to them personally, the less humorous they found it, which I think makes sense. Suggests that offensive humor content is negatively related to humor appreciation. There was a strong correlation between general and personal offense, indicating that these concepts are linked but not identical. So it's about a Pearson's of 0.6, which is quite strong. For the humor and general offense, it was negative 0.13, and then for the humor and personal offense, it was negative 0.19, which is not quite as strong, but that's still like, you know, fairly robust given their statistical framework. So not a strong effect, but it seems to be persistent. And then if they started looking at gender and age as well, and in general, the older the cohort, and it looks like this is almost linear, the stronger of a correlation between general and personal offense, and the stronger the negative correlation between humor and different types of offense. So the oldest cohort, which was 56 to 70, was about twice as likely to the negative effect of something being generally offensive on its humor rating was about twice as strong for the highest age cohort, 56 to 70, than it was for the lowest age cohort, 18 to 25. And in general, the effect of not finding offensive jokes funny was stronger with female respondents, and finding a correlation between general and personal response was also stronger for female correspondents, which makes sense because, you know, generally offensive humor tends to punch down, and you know, I would say that again, just sort of generally, offensive jokes are more likely to be targeted at women, again, just sort of in my general experience. Link to the paper. Oh, the one that we're reading now? Sure. Yeah, the link that I sent you was to the phonological understanding paper. Yeah, so that's sort of the general correlation. It looks like that holds. The age level correlations hold across both genders that were investigated here, and within age cohorts, it looks like the gender effect holds. So it looks like this is not some sort of, you know, multiplicative, no Simpsons paradox here. Anyway, just sort of general findings there. Also, it looks like male respondents were much less likely to say that they didn't get the joke, which is interesting. But yeah, so interesting paper, and I think good to think about. Ooh, that's a nice plot. So it's like a swarm plot, but the points are also sized based on scale, and the each of the axes relates to one of the questions about either offense or humor rating, and it looks very nice. I can see a clear difference in these distributions. Good figure. 10 out of 10. I like it. Yeah, I might have messed with the opacity a little bit, or even faceted this. So we had the two genders that were investigated here on separate facets, just to make it a little bit easier to tell the difference, but still, good plot. Yep. Okay. Well, I'm definitely not reading those. And there were some examples of offensive jokes that I shan't be reading, but you can check them out in the paper link if you are interested. Yes. And so specific, themes that were gender groups disagreed on general offense ratings. This is interesting. So I sort of hypothesis about gendered humor is not actually true. So women were much more likely to rate racist humor as offensive than men were. Gendered humor was about the same. Women were much more likely to rate offense against queer people as offensive. Right, okay, so this is the count of number of most offensive text by topic. Men, so it looks like the only categories where more of the texts were marked as offensive by male respondents and female respondents were religion, not humor, surreal, and then men. It looks like there was one in that category. So interesting. And then it looks like women were much more likely to label aggressive themes, so I'm guessing themes of violence, as offensive than male respondents. So just a sort of general, I think the big point of this paper is like, hey, different people interact with humor differently. It's conditioned, at least in part, by their, social life, and that is important to consider when you are doing automated humor work, because your labels are probably not going to be universal, and treating funny or not funny as a universal label is liable to create a system that a large chunk of people will disagree with. So that's that paper. Next, no, it's my blanket. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear the sort of rustling and tugging. He would very much like it for himself. Speaking of, offensive content, so this paper is also published, and I'm pretty sure this is, so this is from Coling, the 8th workshop on noisy user-generated text, which is, by the way, one of my personal favorite workshops, given my background in history and also the texts that I have had to work with in my career. Generally, they tend to be noisy and user-generated. And the paper is analyzing the real vulnerability of hate speech detection systems against targeted intentional noise, and it is by Payush Agarwal and Torsten Zesch. The last name of the first author is Aggarwal, and the second author is Zesch. Again, apologies if I mispronounce anyone's names. And they are both from Fern Universitat in Hagen. Hagen? So again, apologies if that was not understandable. So what they were looking at was specifically how people get around automated hate speech detection systems by introducing noise to the text. So I'll read the abstract here. Interesting. Gohaku says, today I learned a statistical machine learning algorithm to detect whether sentence contained a "that's what she said" double entendre was developed by Kidden and Brune in 2011, and there's an open source implementation of the system as well. Interesting. Oh yeah, from the Punderstanding paper, yeah. Yes, so the abstract for this paper, hate speech detection systems have been shown to be vulnerable against obfuscation attacks where a potential hater yeah, I mean they are, yes. That's just For me, the lexical item hater is a little bit more informal. So for me, the humor there is a little bit of a surprising mismatch between formality, but they are correct. That is what they are doing. Where a potential hater tries to circumvent detection by deliberately introducing noise into their posts. In previous work, noise is often introduced for all words, which is likely overestimating the impact, or single untargeted words, likely underestimating the vulnerability. We perform a user study asking people to select words they would obfuscate in a post. Using this realistic setting, we find that the real vulnerability of hate speech detection systems against deliberately introduced noise is almost as high as when using a white box attack, and much more severe than when using a non-targeted dictionary. Our results are based on 4 different data sets, 12 obfuscation strategies, and hate speech detection systems using different paradigms. So the sort of, do they have a good example here? Or do I have to come up with one on the fly? Okay, so here they are, they have an example, and I will say that I am reading the example of the hate speech. I am not endorsing this, obviously. So the string that they are obfuscating here is all hate speech researchers should be beaten to death. In the high obfuscation level, they have replaced characters with asterisks in every single word. In the medium level, they have done it in the words hate researchers beaten and death, and in the low obfuscation, they have done it in the words beaten and death. So that's sort of showing the level there of to what degree people are using obfuscation or assume to be using obfuscation. Sort of based on my experience, I would say that the low level looks the most, reasonable to me, but I will say I have not worked much in hate speech detection, and I would probably, defer to a researcher who works in this area. So some of the specific things that are used here, we have a nice little example. So camel case, uppercasing and lowercasing characters. So here in researcher, lowercase r, uppercase e, lowercase s, uppercase e, etc. Character drop, so just removing characters. Here the C from researcher has been dropped. Character flip, so intentionally. The A and the E have been switched. Sorry, this looked exactly like just the word researcher for me. But, switching two characters that are next to each other. Diacritics, adding diacritics, so the E has an accent over it. Both of the E's have an accent over it. Kebab, so adding dashes between each character. Leet speak, so blast from the past. Replacing characters with numeric characters that look similar, so replacing the S with a 5, and the 7 with an H with a 7. I don't know that that's particularly canonical, but maybe it is. Masking, so replacing characters with asterisks. Math speak, this I will say is absolutely awful for people who are using screen readers. So the first R has been replaced with a mathematical character that visually resembles an R. Phonetic, so it's researcher written in the International Phonetic Alphabet using a British accent. I can try it for you. Researcher. More or less. Certainly not how I would transcribe that for my dialect. For one thing, I'm rhotic, so I would have all of the R's that are in there actually pronounced, just saying. Spacing, so adding spaces between each word. Snake, so adding underscores between each word. And vowel drop, removing all the vowels. I realize that was a lot of talking, but this is also a podcast now, so I'm trying to provide appropriate voicing of the things that I am reading. Kohaku says, hater, as in don't hate the player, hate the game. Even so, yes. Yes, so that's their sort of, option. And I would say that there's another kind of common option that I'm familiar with, again, from reading in this area, which is using coded language, or sometimes you'll hear people talk about dog whistles, where to a non-informed reader it would appear benign, but to someone who has, you know, learned the meaning or the alternative meanings of those, you know, especially words or phrases, it no longer appears benign and is, you know, signaling or standing in for members of a group, right? So one thing that I think one thing that definitely a lot of work has been done on is the use of 3 parentheses around a name. Sometimes I think I've heard them called echoes, again, by people working in this field, which was used, and may or may not still be in general usage by people doing anti-Semitic hate speech to show that someone was Jewish, or they believed that someone was Jewish. So, I mean, if you didn't know that and you just saw someone's name with, you know, parentheses around it, you might be like, oh, okay, that's what a weird affectation. But if you were aware of that, you'd be like, oh, this person is, you know, referring to certainly a context in which hate speech occurs. So different strategies, and it sounds like a lot of the previous work has sort of picked one of these strategies and just sort of done it to all the words, and they suggest that you know, based on this work, is overestimating the impact and where people do this, or single untargeted words, right? So for example, in this medium and high context, people are, you know, obfuscating the word researcher, which I would say in general probably is not going to be tagged by hate speech detection systems. So that's the general idea. I think another good example of not quite hate speech, but certainly language change designed to circumvent automated censors would be people referring to you know, killing as unaliving, which is I've certainly been seeing, again, just sort of as language change happens, I have been seeing that more, and presumably at some point it's going to stop being helpful for getting around censorship systems, because it will be added to the system. So. Yes, so they are also, you know, you can target different words, so you can pick a random content word, so that's going to remove, you know, words that are of parts of speech that are not nouns, basically, or some verbs. Any word, a specific fixed dictionary, right, like death, and then a white box and domain dictionary. Hello, Nico Tuba. You have produced something that I cannot read. Yes. And what is the difference between a white box dictionary and a domain dictionary? I would like to know. So a white box dictionary is an in-house lexical dictionary populated with tokens that are important for an LSTM-based hate speech classification model for hate label predictions. Okay, so this is, the words in this dictionary are being picked out from the model that they're going to be weighted. So this is a model-specific attack. Whereas the domain dictionary, we performed an annotation study which resulted in a domain-specific dictionary. Okay, and I believe they had participants do this. So the white box dictionary are words would be model-specific. The domain dictionary would be, I guess, user population-specific, the specific words that they're going to obfuscate. Yes, we use this dictionary to obfuscate exactly one word in each post that people consider the most problematic. One sec. I had to sneeze, but I'm muted in time. All right, and so the way that they got that dictionary was they basically asked people like, hey, if you were going to do hate speech and try to avoid being detected by systems, what would you do? Like, which words would you annotate? And then they got that, you know, that dictionary. There's examples of hate speech that I'm not going to read. Yes, and so I just want to go down and see the results about how well all these things worked against these different systems. So, we have here each of the different, techniques. I'll just read the figure here. Distilbert's hate level performance on the T1 dataset before and after obfuscation on all obfuscation strategies for target selections. Except for camel case, differences are found to be statistically significant based on the McNemer test after Bonferroni connection. So if you remember, so snake case worked. Wait, what was snake again? I'm gonna go up and look at snake. I don't think it's actually the... Okay, so yes, snake is character underscore, and character underscore. Nico Tuba says, that's in Polish. Great to see you. Great to see you as well. One of the professors in my graduate program, Barbacicko, was a Polish researcher. And what I learned from sort of learning about Polish from her is that it's very challenging for an English speaker to get very, very, very rich syntactic and morphological language. So great if you're a syntax researcher. All right, so it looks like, so Distilbert's hate label performance, I'm gonna scroll out so you can see that all. I think that works. Here, actually, let me do this and make my life easier for a little bit. There we go, okay. So it could handle, obfuscating with case pretty well. And then we have sort of different strategies are differently effective in terms of how much they do the obfuscating. So it looks like randomly selecting one word or randomly selecting a content word sort of trade off for being the least effective, but they all are more effective. And followed by the fixed dictionary. So domain, what's the difference between the fixed and the domain? I think the fixed they came up with before. Okay, so the fixed is just an existing lexicon based on 3 different research lexicons from 2018 and 2017. Okay, so they just basically took a bunch of existing dictionaries, and it was better than just picking a random word, but less good than the next one, which is the domain dictionary. So this is the dictionary that the users produced based on what word they thought was going to be most effective, which is more or less on par. These look pretty similar with the white box dictionary, which is based on specifically the words that the model was weighting highest when making decisions. So that is a model specific attack, and it looks like it tracks very well with the domain dictionary produced by users, which honestly suggests to me that that's probably a feather in the model's hat, that it is correctly selecting the words that users are most likely to say are, the ones that they would change. And then finally, the most effective strategy is to change everything, which again, probably not super realistic. Yeah. And just looking at sort of which of the methods this model is most vulnerable to, interestingly, it looks like math speak it handles pretty well, and then dropping and flipping characters it doesn't do so well on, which is interesting because BERT should be able to handle character level perturbations. In theory. And then the rest of them were sort of all more or less the same. So masking characters, leet speech, did much worse with leet speech than it did with math speak, interestingly. I would not have guessed that it would do particularly well with math speak, but it did. And then, the next sort of group is dropping vowels, snake case, spacing, phonetic, and diacritics. So basically what this is showing is if this system could handle these obfuscation strategies well, everything would be over on this yellow line. Instead, it is not handling them especially well. and in particular, the targeted word strategies, so targeting either the words that were most likely to be used by a hate speech detection system, or that users had identified as the words that would be most impactful, was, besides just changing everything, pretty helpful, and much more helpful than sort of combining a bunch of existing lexicons, which suggests to me that the existing lexicons may, need updating, right? Because those are from, 2017 is what, 5 years ago? And one thing about hate speech is that it tends to move pretty quickly, because the communities that are engaging with it have a strong desire to continue to engage with it, so they will change it quickly, unfortunately. So yeah, that's the paper, and I think it's particularly helpful if you're working in this area. I really like the combination of model-specific adversarial attacks and user annotation and showing the relationship between those. I think that that's particularly a good point from this paper. Yeah, so good job, authors. Interesting paper. I think very helpful if you're probably working in this area. All right, moving on. So this is a paper. This is an EMNLP paper, but I have decided to talk about the thread that the author wrote instead, just because I think it's a little bit more visually good to look at than the paper itself. So this has been sort of an interesting week in that, there has both been a lot of discussion. I'm not gonna show it or anything, but there's been a lot of discussion of people being NLP people in the field being like, linguists have never done anything and they don't know anything. And at the same time, also a bunch of NLP papers being like, hey, this core idea from linguistics, actually it's pretty helpful in an NLP with these language model applications. So quite the cognitive dissonance. Am I bitter about it? Maybe. Maybe a little bit. Anyway. So this paper is by, and I will open the link just so you can see the paper if you are watching. The paper title is Loading. Are representations built from the ground up? An empirical examination of local composition in language models by Emmy Liu and Graham Newbig from Carnegie Mellon. And, well, we're already looking at the paper. Let's just look at the paper. And this is, again, from EMNLP coming up, which I've mentioned before that I'm not traveling for conferences. I don't think it's necessary, and I do wish as a field we would move beyond having to force everybody to be in person. But also, this conference in particular is... has been pretty divisive in the community. And I'm just sad about it. Just sad. Anyway, so the idea of compositionality in linguistics is that you can break things down into smaller pieces and then combine them and recombine them in different orders. So here, you have this output, the dog sits on the sofa, which you can decompose into the dog and sits on the sofa. In syntax terms, that would be an NP and a VP, a noun phrase and a verb phrase. And there's a bunch of, I don't know, if you're familiar with, tree-based stuff, a lot of it was developed for tree-based modeling. A lot of it was developed for, building this sort of syntactic structure. Reading from the thing here, at the same time, many phrases are non-compositional, carrying a meaning beyond that of each part in isolation, right? So if I said the dog sits on the sofa, right, you can get the meaning of that from knowing the meaning of dog, sits, and sofa. If I said the dog kicks the bucket, that is a metaphor, and if you know about kicking in buckets and dogs, you may not be able to correctly interpret the intended meaning there, which is that the dog has died, right? So kicking the bucket is an idiom in English for dying. I think it might be an American idiom. I don't know if it's that common in other English-speaking communities. So if you don't know the non-compositional meaning of that, you cannot correctly interpret the sentence. Continuing to read from the abstract here, representing both of these types of phrases is critical for language understanding, but it is an open question whether modern language models learn to do so. In this work, we examine the question. We first formulate a problem of predicting the language model internal representation of longer phrases given those of their constituents. We find that the representation of a parent phrase can be predicted with some accuracy given the affine transformation of its children. Well, we would expect the predictive accuracy to correlate with human judgments of semantic compositionality. We find that this is largely not the case, indicating that language models may not accurately distinguish between compositional and non-compositional phrases. In other words, they wouldn't be able to correctly interpret things like idioms. We perform a variety of analyses, shedding light on when different varieties of language models do and do not generate compositional representations, and discuss implications for future modeling work. And I don't think they talk about it in this paper, but there is a paper from, I want to say 2017, 2018. So compositionality also, implies a hierarchical relationship between the parts. And there is some work from when transformers were just coming on the scene suggesting that transformers were less good at being able to extract and model hierarchical relationships than LSTMs in particular. So it may perhaps not be entirely a surprise that the nuances of different types of hierarchical relationships is also challenging for this class of models. All right. And then there's sort of a bunch of math as they're describing their various, ways of doing this. So one using arithmetic, one using learned probes, where they have this sort of learned alpha that they're using to combine these. And they're using TreeBank here, Penn TreeBank. Oh, it's been a while since I've heard, been a while since I talked about the Penn TreeBank. The final data set consists of 823,000 phrases after excluding null values and duplicates. We collected the length of the left child in words. So if we're looking at this sort of, the dog sits on the sofa, the left child would be the one on the left, which is the dog. The noun phrase, you might say. And the right child in words, and the tree's production rule, which we refer to as tree type. There were 50,000 tree types in total, but many of those are unique. So they are also looking at idioms. I'm just sort of skimming this section. Previous data sets center around notable bigrams, some of which are compositional and some of which are non-compositional. However, there is a positive correlation between bigram frequency and human compositionality scores in this data set, which means that it is unclear whether models are capturing compositionality or merely frequency effects if they correlate well with the human scores. Interesting. So basically they're saying that the more frequent a bigram is, the more likely humans are to rank it as compositional. So non-compositional bigrams may be rated as non-compositional, possibly because they're non-compositional, but possibly because they're rarer. So there's a latent variable there you can't pick apart. Because models are likely more sensitive to surface features of language than humans. I made a face at the camera for those of you listening. We gathered a more controlled set of phrases to compare with human judgments. Since non-compositional phrases are somewhat rare, we begin with a set of seed idioms and bigrams from previous studies. We use idioms because they are a common source of non-compositional phrases. Duplicates after lemmatization were removed. Some examples here. So the idiom is devil's advocate, and the match phrase is Bakerstown. So devil's advocate is not someone who is literally advocating for the devil, but someone who is arguing for an unpopular position, not necessarily because they believe it, but because they like to argue generally, is sort of the implication there. Act of darkness, I don't know what that means. As opposed to abandonment of institution. What's an act of darkness? Is that like an act of nature? It's the title of a novel. It's an idiom for sex. Helpful, thank you. I'm not familiar with that one, not part of my dialect. Whereas abandonment of institution is leaving the institution. School of hard knocks versus field of social studies. So the school of hard knocks is sort of the idea that you have learned by going through duress rather than, it's not a literal school where people, knocks are like punches or people are punching you. Whereas the field of social studies is the scientific field of studying society. And they also have the log frequency here. So these things have, more or less matched log frequency in addition to having the same syntactic pattern, which, oh, that's good experimental aside. Very nice. Very nice. Love it. Fabulous. Good controls. And then they looked at their results. So they were doing probing for each of these and comparing them. Since we are comparing the probes to each other relative to the same anisotropic vectors, that is not necessarily a problem. However, in order to compare each probe's performance compared to chance, we correct for anisotropy using a control task. This task is using the trained probe to predict a random phrase embedding from the set of tree bank phrase embeddings for the model, and recording the distance between the compositional probe's prediction and the random embedding. This allows us to calculate the error ratio, distance of the probe, distance of the control, where distance probe represents the original average distance from the true representation, and distance control is the average distance on a control task. This quantifies how much of the probe improves over a random baseline that takes anisotropy into account, where a smaller value is better. In most cases, the affine probe still performs the best, so we continue to use it for consistency on all model and representation types. Interestingly, there was a trend of the white child being weighted more heavily than the left child, and each model representation type combination had its own characteristic ratio of the left to right child weight. For instance, in birth, the weight on the left child was 12, whereas it was 20 for the right. That is fascinating. I wonder if that's due to the, because BERT uses that, sort of funky weighting thing, right, with the output. I wonder if that's due to that. Interesting. All right, so here we are looking at the compositionality score, cosine similarity, and standard deviation for the approximate probe across tenfold. I don't know what all of these mean. So we have the additive, I'm guessing that's the additive distance, the affine distance, MLP, the multi-layer perceptron distance, I guess? What's W1 and W2? Sorry, I'm scrolling looking for more information on what these things are. I think I probably need to go up. NP. Reconstruction errors. Judgments. I'm trying to read the results, basically, is what I'm looking at here. Okay, I think this is actually probably going to be the best table to look at just for the results, and I will move myself. Whee! So here we have the models and representations, and then the subphrase versus idiomatic accuracy. So accuracy of model representations on the subphrase tests and the idiomas test for whether or not they were idioms. What's the difference between those two? And then we're into the related work, which is right here at the back. So let's see. Subphrase. Okay, so this is table 5. This is this. Annotators indicated to what extent they believed each part of the phrase contributed to the final meaning. We examined examples in which the annotators rated one part of the phrase, for example, alpha, as contributing more to the final meaning, and checked how often the distance between the cosine of alpha for x and a is greater than the distance the cosine of the alpha for x or b. Models do surprisingly poorly at this test, with most performing below chance. Results are presented at table 5. An error analysis on Roberta average indicated that in many cases errors were due to idiomaticity failures. For example, noble gas is a type of gas that was rated as being more similar to gas by humans, but noble by Roberta. Oh, I see. Interesting. Okay. So what would chance be here? Similar errors were made for phrases such as grandfather clock, right as rain, ballpark estimate. A grandfather clock is a type of clock, as right as rain indicates that something is all right, and a ballpark estimate is a rough estimate. Interesting. This is such a dense paper. Maybe I should have stuck with the Twitter thread instead of going to read the paper. Dense in a good way. By dense here, I mean that they have done a lot of work. There's a lot of analysis. There's a lot of richness. It's dense like cake, not dense like 2 bricks, which is, you know, an idiom for being dumb. Sorry, not dumb, but unintelligent. Okay, so what they're looking at, the difference from the average and the CLS. So the average would be, this should in theory be the random chance, right? And then this is the compositional representation. Okay, so I think what they're saying is that the subphrase accuracy is about as good as chance on, they're trying to find the head. We can examine examples where they rated the phrase. Okay, so this is, did they correctly identify which part of the phrase most contributed to the meaning? I believe was what they are looking at here. So chance would be 50. And that's about where most of the just sort of average models are. But the ones that are using the, you know, the CLS token are also right around 50, with the one big exception being Roberta, which is closer to 60. Okay, so they do slightly better on idioms? Is that what I'm reading here? Because that's not, I don't think that's what the text said. Interesting. Okay. I'm just going to read the conclusion. We analyze the compositionality of representations from several language models and find that there is an effective affine approximation in terms of a phrase's syntactic children for many phrases, right? So you can add the children and get the information. Although language model representations may be surprisingly predictable, we find that human compositionality judgments do not align well with how they are structured. In this work, we study the representations produced after extensive training. However, the consistency of several trends we observe suggests that there may be theoretical reasons why language model representations are structured in certain ways. Future work could investigate the evolution of compositionality through training, or motivate methods that would allow language models to approximate compositional generalization while representing non-compositionality. Alexia says dense like 2 bricks. Yeah. I think that this is another one that I believe this is British idiom. It's not in my dialect, but yes. So basically the point of this paper, which I would need to spend substantially longer on, I think, to fully grok, but we do have other things we want to talk about today, is that basically the way that language models are handling compositional phrases is fundamentally unlike the way that humans are doing it, and that this may be just a feature of this particular model architecture and potentially unfixable, is I think the very high level outcome of this paper. Yeah, and I'll pop the link to the chat as well. So if you are interested in reading it in more depth, you are definitely welcome to do so. And it seems like a very thorough, very deeply thought out paper. I just don't have enough time to get it all the way in my brain. So apologies to Emmy and Graham for not doing a better job with this paper, but I do think it is interesting. All right, next up. So this is also an EMNLP paper. And the basic findings here are that code-based large language models can, reading here, so this tweet is from Shuyan Zhao, SHUYANZHXYC on Twitter. Code LLMs, e.g. Codex, can perform natural language tasks better than natural language LLMs, e.g. GPT-3 or fine-tuned T5, if you format your task as code. Programs inherently rich code with none of the words I just said were right. Let me try again. Programs inherently encode rich structured information, which is useful to a lot of NLP tasks. You can be creative in formulating your tasks. So the basic, let's pop over to the paper as well. The basic point of this paper is like, hey, it turns out that structure is, oh, this is also one of Graham's paper. Yeah. I wonder if this is one of his advisees. So the paper is Language Models of Code are Few-Shot Commonsense Learners. So if you are familiar with the paper title for GPT-3, I think it is something like Language Models are Zero-Shot Learners or something. And it is by Aman Madan, AMANMADAAN, Shuyan Zhao, Yuri Alon, AOLON, Yiming Yang, and Graham Newbig, all from Carnegie Mellon, except for Graham, who's also at Inspired Cognition, which I think was founded fairly recently. I'll read the abstract, and this is again from ENLP 2022. We address the general task of structured common sense reasoning. Given a natural language input, the goal is to generate a graph, such as an event or reasoning graph. To employ large language models for this task, existing approaches serialize the output graph as a flat list of nodes and edges. Although feasible, these serialized graphs strongly deviate from the natural language corpora that language models were pre-trained on, hindering language models from generating them correctly. There probably are some flat, graph representations in the training data, but it's certainly not the bulk of it. In this paper, we show that when we instead frame structured common sense reasonings as code generation tasks, pre-trained language models of code are better structured common sense reasoners than language models of natural language, even when the downstream task does not involve source code at all. We demonstrate our approach across 3 diverse structured common sense reasoning tasks. In all these natural language tasks, we show that using our approach, a code generation LM outperforms natural language models that are fine-tuned on the target task, e.g. T5, and other strong LMs such as GPT-3 in the few-shot setting. And then code is available. Which, I mean, what it says on the tin, right? Treating language data, adding structure and labels, not just structure, but also labels, by treating a language problem as a computer language problem seems to help when your output is to generate a graph. And this is something that I've talked about before. I think that graphical representations are, certainly easier to check than, flat language output. And there's sort of, an example here of how to do that. So you have this, list of things. So this is a directed acyclic graph. The top two nodes are take the pies out to cool and open cabinet drawer, both of which feed out into a single node, take out several plates, which in turn feeds out into two other nodes, begin putting pies on plate, and fill pies onto plates evenly, which feeds out to, oh, I was wearing mascara. Well, hopefully I haven't smudged it too much, which in turn feeds out into serve the pot pies on a plate. So it's a structured representation, right? You would go through 4 steps, which order you went in and which steps are directed by the graph. And then there is a Python version of it, right, that defines this as a tree structure where the nodes and the edges are both, directly defined, given the goal. And then there are 2 outputs. Using the dot format or a list of edges, which allows modeling the graph using standard language models. These popular choices are efficient in principle, however, these formats are loosely structured, verbose, and not common in text corpora. Okay, so they're saying this is how people generally do it, these 2 representations here, whereas this Pythonic representation is the one that they used, and then they used code. Overall, I think it's an interesting approach. I mean, I always love a little bit more structure on language. My sort of big concern with this project as a general approach, and I asked the authors and they said they think it should work just fine, is that most code languages are based on English, right? Like most computer coding languages, like Python, for example. Very Englishy. Class, English word. Tree, English word. Def, based on definition, English word. Init, based on initialize, English word. Self, English word, right? So, and I am, huge props to those of you who work on coding who are, not mainly English speakers. And I do feel like code-based language models are probably going to give English a warm start that other languages are not necessarily going to give. And of course, this is a very, particular structured task where, in theory, you can just, the task names could be anything, right? Like the nodes could be anything. You could put any text in there, it could be in any language. But if you were going to sort of generalize this for other tasks, which personally I think is probably a good idea, right? Structure and labels, actually, it turns out, are kind of important in language. And particularly for generative tasks and grounding and checking things. But that's sort of my big concern with the task. Also, I don't think they mentioned that they're working on English in here. Let me double check. Oh, wait, nope, they did. Another limitation of our work is that we exclusively experiment with datasets in English. Exploring the efficacy of structure generation models in cross-lingual settings is an interesting and important future work. I wonder if they added that. I could have sworn it wasn't there last time I looked at this paper, but you know what? I'm very tired, so it could very well have been in the paper and I just didn't notice it. So overall, I think it's a good work. I think it's an interesting line of research. I do think that, as with most things in NLP, English centrism is important to keep in mind. And that is all the research papers I had. An hour and 15 minutes. I can't help it. It's hard to, unless it has like a very straightforward output, it's kind of hard to be super succinct with research papers because by definition, research papers are very specific, which means you have to understand what they're being specific about. And apologies for not doing a great job with the compositionality paper, but hopefully you have a better idea and we'd have to do a whole thing. Alexei says, there are programming languages in Russian. Oh, interesting. Are they especially popular? I mean, presumably they're pretty popular in Russia, but I don't think I've personally run across them. Then again, I'm in a person who lives in a world where most people talk to me in English, which also happens to be my native language. Case in point, I know many of you are speakers of other languages as well. All right, professional stuff. This should go a little bit faster. I have like 60 links today, and we are like a 1/10 of the way through. The research papers always take the longest, though. So this isn't really research, but I thought it was helpful. So the Russian programming languages may change my opinion on sticking with English? Maybe. Or are you suggesting that it's more difficult to use than English-based languages? I mean, for better or worse, we are mostly in kind of a situation where a lot of the NLP community uses English as a lingua franca. A lot of the NLP community uses Mandarin, which is not... I've mentioned this recently. My success learning Mandarin was non-existent, unfortunately. Sorry, flashbacks. It was a rough time. Anyway, so the... this is from Tal Linzen, who is a professor at NYU and research scientist at Google. Oh, I didn't know Tal was at Google. Did I know that? I might have known that. And he is quoting Kwok Le, who, I also didn't know that Kwok is working on, maybe this isn't his model, but I think he's best known for working on sort of the reinforcement learning, if I remember. Talking about FLAN T5, an instruction fine-tuned on 18,000 plus language tasks, leading to dramatically improved prompting and multi-step reasoning abilities. Alexa says, they're just ungodly. Don't even Google them. The Russian programming languages. Noted. I mean, I think Lojban, which is a constructed language, was also developed, at least in part, to reduce ambiguity in a way that would be helpful in computational settings, and also rough. But, and Tal has replied to this paper and has a long thread here that I thought made some really good points, so I'm just going to read it and then react as I read it. Just to make sure the point doesn't get lost, the success of instruction fine-tuning highlights the limitation of the self-supervised language modeling objective. So if we were to look at, say, the last page that we looked at, language models of code are few-shot common-sense learners. The sort of the parallel there is that, like, well, you know, code is much more structured than natural languages in a computational setting, even though all language has internal structure, and modeling that internal structure was for a long time one of the main focuses of the field of NLP, so things like parsing aimed to do that. The success of instruction fine-tuning highlights the limitation of the self-supervised language modeling objective. The GPT-3 paper hypothesized that a large enough corpus will contain sufficient signal to meta-learn to perform tasks with a small number of demonstrations, but that signal turns out to be quite weak, and more explicit meta-learning through instruction tuning seems necessary. So, you know, prompt engineering is a thing, and if these models were, you know, if it were... basically, he's saying that, you know, you need to really do additional learning in order to get, you know, very flexible zero-shot output. So yes, Kwok Le is right, of course, that the output of instruction tuning is a language model and can be used as one at inference time, but it's not trained just on the language modeling objective. Sounds pedantic maybe, but I think it's an important point, and I would agree. And, you know, historically, language models were part of a larger system, and the system included things that introduced more structure, right? It was just sort of like a way to deal with the statistical fuzziness of language when ranking options, basically. Before Jason Wei mocks me for being pedantic and an old, I'll add that there's a clear practical implication here, which is that in many cases, it's going to be more cost-effective to pay people to create new tasks than to pre-train the model on a larger corpus, especially if you are outside of the English language context, which I think is, like, absolutely spot on, right? Like, specific label data that is relevant for your work is going to be more helpful than just a stew of whatever you can scrape up in, like, you know, Amharic or Bengali or, you know, Wu or whatever it is that you're working on. Maybe the last kind of obvious comment is that this model is a great technical accomplishment for Google. Sorry for the conflict of interest, because Tal is also at Google, both on the engineering and prompt magic side. And at the same time, it relies on public domain tasks created by researchers from many other institutions. To belabor the pedantic point to death, the GPT hypothesis, language models are few-shot learners, was actually a system can learn to be a few-shot learner through next word prediction, not we can create a next word prediction system that is a few-shot learner. Also, transparency is important. You can tell Flan 5 and Flan Palm are instruction tuned because it says so right in their name, and we know on which tasks. When people use a GPT-3 variant, it's never clear if it's instruction tuned, and if so, on what. Yeah, so I think that we're going to talk about that embedded tweet there at the end, which I think is a good point, right? Like, certainly for me, this week, as I've been reading papers and sort of like seeing discussions, it definitely seems like there is a growing interest in the field and growing success with using language models as part of systems and incorporating, not in the same way we used to, right? Like we're not, you know, straight up slotting a language model in, like large language models in where smaller statistical language models were working, for sure not, but doing more structured work, creating more specialized models, creating additional specialized data sets, and additional specialized tasks and ways of phrasing those tasks to produce something that's actually useful, and actually has, you know, commercial uses, right? Like Google's not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They want something they can sell. Just to be, you know, brutally frank about it, especially like a model like this, it is expensive. So they think that it is a worthwhile investment, and they think that adding this structure and adding this additional information is important. And sort of as it stands, it's just not, you know, good enough for what they're doing. And let's talk about this next thing. So this is a tweet. Nope. I didn't actually. So the tweet that Dan Tal here is quoting at the end, so I'm actually thinking of a different tweet, is by Daniel Kashabi, Daniel Kashabi, who is from Johns Hopkins, and used to be at UW. I wonder if I met him. Possibly. It is concerning that an increasing number of research papers base the core of their study/findings on the new GPT-3 models, especially DaVinci 002, which we know little about tuning/training. How can we do scientific research on these murky foundations? And I would say that a lot of the work that's been doing on large language models, I mean, obviously there is very careful scientific work that's being done, right? Like I think a great example is, you know, this compositionality study, making sure to control for variables and ask a specific question like syntactic pattern, like frequency. But also a lot of the work that's been done on GPT-3 and other language models is, you know, as someone with a lot of scientific training, I would certainly not call science. And the fact that these models are also being trained on sort of like question mark data, like I'm pretty sure we still don't know what all was in the training corpus for GPT-3. We certainly didn't last time I checked, right? That problem is continuing to happen, right? Particularly with the variants. What are they fine-tuned on? Like, we ran onto it with Whisper. Like, what all was the data? Question mark. They weren't saying. We have no idea. I'm not gonna say it's just an OpenAI thing, but definitely they do it. And I understand the pressures, right? They want to publish things. They want to get, it seems like OpenAI really runs on attention. They want to get like attention for their work, and I get it. It's nice to get attention. It's nice to have people write about what you're doing, but along the way, a lot of what's been lost is sort of the promise of transparency. And to be perfectly frank, even if they were entirely transparent about where they got their data from, most people wouldn't be able to do it because we are not made of money, right? Like I certainly could not afford even a very small to train even a very small large language model. Yeah, I just can't, right? So we talked about it a little bit ago. Someone was like, we're going to democratize training large language models on your specific data. It's going to cost only $100,000, which is like, I don't have that sitting around, y'all. I haven't paid myself for my business yet, ever, at all. So yeah, anyway, big long rant. The next thing is from, so this is, I think in the same line. This is from Mark Riedel, who is at Georgia Tech, we've talked about before, does, particularly generative stuff and storytelling stuff. At MARK_RIEDL had another thread that I think made a lot of good points. So I'll just read and react as I've been doing. I'm increasingly of the opinion that we need to be very careful about what conclusions we draw in research that involves GPT-3, even as a baseline. We don't really know all we need to know about how the different versions are trained. Many use instruct-like training methods. That is, we can't say X is true of a language model at scale Y. We can instead only say X is true of a language model on scale Y trained in unknown ways on unknown data. When we conclude that GPT-3 is capable of X, we may no longer be doing fundamental AI research. Instead, we may be doing something more akin to anthropology or ethnography on this mysterious group called OpenAI and this mysterious black box they left us. We would be better off studying open models like GPT-J, GPT-Neo-X, or other OPT models. I don't think OPT is hosted anywhere, which means it's inaccessible to all but the most well-funded research labs. That means GPT-3 remains the default to the detriment of science. Yeah, and then Blanche Minerva, Stella Rose Biederman, who is an NLP researcher at Booz Allen and AI Elsevier, brought it up. So, yeah. Fundamentally, we cannot do science on GPT-3 because we don't know what's in it, and it's hard to do on the variants because we don't know how they were trained. So, it's like... I'm trying to think of a good analogy from the history of science. Yeah, and I like the way that Mark put it. We may be doing something more akin to anthropology or ethnography on this mysterious group called OpenAI, which, yeah, right? This isn't good AI research. It is what we as a field have sort of been pushed into, I mean, in my case, certainly against my will, by having a lot of money injected from a third party, to be perfectly frank. And it also, I don't love that a small number of individuals who have a lot of money and power can sort of drag an entire research field in a specific direction. And obviously not everyone is focusing on large language models, but there's the number of people who got just brutal rejections for dataset papers from ENNLP is just heartbreaking. It sounds like it's getting increasingly difficult to get dataset papers published, which is horrible because dataset papers are fundamental to doing AI science. Fundamental research in AI. We need it unless you're doing, pure reinforcement learning with people who usually aren't on language datasets. On language, because you need the language data. So anyway, every morning I wake up and worry about the state of my field. Oh, right. So this is something that I heard about, and then I was like, wow, that sounds really good. Maybe too good. So this is a tweet from Frank Hutter, who is a professor of machine learning at the University of Freiburg and chief expert on AutoML at Bosch. And the tweet says, this may revolutionize data science. We introduced Tab PFN, a new tabular data classification method that takes 1 second and yields state-of-the-art performance, better than hyperparameter optimized gradient boosting in 1 hour. And then there's a graph being it's better than Cat Boost or GBM or XGBoost. Which, yeah, that sounds great. I would love great results quickly. But a little subtweet here from Boyan Tungs, who some of you may know from Kaggle, who is now at NVIDIA, a state-of-the-art tabular data machine learning that is somehow orders of magnitude faster than the existing algorithms, and yet so computationally expensive that it can only be used with red data sets. A bunch of red flag emojis. And one of the limitations brought up is that it only works up to 1,000 data points. Which is not that many data points. I have certainly worked with data sets that size or smaller, but it's not most of them. Hello, Potato of Fire. Welcome to the stream. So yeah, I think this is cool. If they can make it less expensive, I might be interested. All right, next up. These guys. I wish this wasn't news, but it is. I'm gonna put my hair back up. So there's been, actually last week after we finished stream, there's been a whole bunch of drama with Stable Diffusion. What a surprise. Who could ever have expected this? Where somebody uploaded a Stable Diffusion model and Stable Diffusion asked Hugging Face to take it down. So company Stability AI has requested a takedown of this published model, characterizing it as a leak of their IP. Well, we are waiting for a formal legal request, and even though Hugging Face is not knowledgeable of the IP agreements, if any, between the repo owner, Runway ML, and Stability AI, we are flagging this repository as having potential/disputed IP rights. So my understanding, I am not that deep in this community, and I don't especially wish to be, because I'm gonna be honest, it sounds awful. I have not heard anything from anybody that makes me think that these would be fun people to hang out with. But my understanding is that, so Stability AI is this company that just raised millions and millions of dollars, and the whole sort of promise they made the community was that they were going to be democratizing, and it was going to be all open source. And I have thoughts on open source that I'm going to save for a little bit later, but I've been thinking a lot about it, having worked, previously for an open source company, and also having a lot of ties in the open science community and open source community, particularly in R and Python, things that are often on my mind. But so they were training a new version of the model, and then someone who worked at Runway ML, which is like another company that they were collaborating with, I guess, I don't know all the details, published the version of the model before Stability wanted it published. That's my understanding. And then they wrote, so Daniel Jeffries, who is, I want to say the CIO at Stability. Does he say anywhere? Yeah, I don't see it. Anyway, I'm pretty sure he is in the C-suite at Stability. And wrote a blog post on his Substack, why the future of open source AI is so much bigger than Stable Diffusion 1.5 and why it matters to you. Discussion here. There's a reason we've taken a step back at Stability AI and choose not to release 1.5 as quickly as we released earlier checkpoints. We also won't stand by quietly when other groups leak the model in order to draw some quick press to themselves while trying to wash their hands of responsibility. That's quite something for somebody at Stability to be upset about. We've heard from regulators and the general public that we need to focus more strongly on security to ensure that we're taking all the steps possible to make sure people don't use Stable Diffusion for illegal purposes or hurting people. Part of the reason that I'm being salty about this is that there was discussions on the Discord that we've talked about previously, Stability's Discord, before the model was released, where the key developers were like, hey, we know you're going to do illegal stuff with it, just don't do it on our servers. So clearly they knew it was an issue before they released the first run of the model, but now that it's a new version, they're like, well, actually, maybe we should slow down a little bit now that we've raised a huge funding round. You will forgive me if I have a little bit of trouble believing that they are super duper committed to being responsible technologists. Sorry, that was a really long, weird pause. I was just thirsty. In the absence of news for us, rumors started swirling around why we didn't release the next version yet. Your entire shtick was that you were going to be so super open with the community at all time, and it turns out that it certainly hasn't. Open source is where innovation comes from, not 100% of the time. It's certainly been a big part of it, but many things that are innovative are closed source. Blah, 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 blah. Openness works because no single company or person can imagine all the possible ways to use a brilliant new technology. I fundamentally disagree with that, but clearly this is a person that I have a very strong, distinguish, our worldviews are not the same. Yes, so basically what they're saying is we are forming an open source committee to decide on major issues like cleaning data, not safe for work policies, and formal guidelines for model release. Yeah, that sounds like it would have been great to have before you released the first model. Open source AI needs to be guided by the same democratic principles as the rest of open source. We've also announced a prize for deepfake detection, and we'll release that software open source and free of charge to help society combat the abuse of machine learning. So when we say we have to slow down a little bit, it's because if we don't deal with very reasonable feedback from society and our own communities that they were getting before they released anything, I'm just gonna say it, I know for a fact, then there's a chance open source AI simply won't exist and no one will be able to release powerful models. That's not a world we want to live in. So basically they're saying like, hey, actually we're maybe potentially gonna face consequences, so we're slowing down development because we would prefer not to face those consequences. And the community that they built up, which... That's my dog. I don't know if you can hear him. He thinks it's lunchtime. Is upset about this because they, you know, really built up their brand around everything being open and everything being democratized and everything being available. And now that it seems like they may, what I'm getting from this is that now that they think that they may be getting consequences from this and have also raised a very big funding round, actually they think that slowing down is the responsible thing to do, which, don't get me wrong, I agree. I do think that they should have been moving more slowly from the get-go. But there's Cognition says dog yawning, yeah. Potato fire laughing emoji, yeah. Feels a little bit insincere to me, and it sounds like the community is sort of agreeing. Anyway, so that's what's happening with that, which I'm sure you have heard about if you're in the community. I don't think I talked about them when we talked about my list of AI companies that I wouldn't work for. This right at the bottom of the list, both because I don't think they're going to exist in a year, but also it seems like a horrible working environment. So, speaking of good working environments, our studio is hiring. And also they are changing their name to Posit this month, I think. So this URL might get updated in the near future. And, you know, Posit is P-O-S-I-T. They have a bunch of different job openings, but... They've got some developer advocate, developer educations. The one that came across my dash that I was like, oh, this may be interesting for some of y'all, is that they are hiring somebody to work on Shiny, which is an R-based web interface front-end database. What are they called? You see all the things. It's not a table. It's not a database. Dashboard. Dashboarding package. So yeah, if you are interested, might check them out. And overall, it seems like a pretty good place to work. I haven't heard a lot of, you know, extremely negative feedback from my network. So dashboarding, yes, thank you, Cognition. There's a little bit of a delay between me and the chat, but that is what I meant. Also on sort of the high note, so this is something that I'm kind of interested in, but I don't think I can justify buying it. So Mycroft is a company that does privacy first and open source. Sorry, you're just gonna hear him good until he gets fed, which is not gonna be until after stream, so buckle up. Voice assistants, and they also have a hardware. So this is the second version of their hardware that is privacy first, right? So this is called the Mark II. It is a state-of-the-art, privacy-respecting smart speaker designed for you and your family, from kids to grandparents. At the same time, it is open hardware and software for developer and makers. It provides a great voice experience without sacrificing privacy. Never collects data from you unless you ask us to. Opt in rather than opt out. Love it. Love to see it. It can even run without an internet connection. Also, love to see it. Active noise cancellation, a bright full-color touchscreen, and 10 watts of room-filling audio. The Mark II can go head-to-head with other high-end smart speakers offered by big tech companies. And also, they are not spying on you unless you explicitly say that they can. Show your demand for a privacy-respecting open future and pre-order is yours now. And also, open source. You can get in there and mess around. And there's some holidays coming up. I might drop some hints. I might drop some hints to people in my life that this would be a thing that I'd like. Yeah, yeah, so Minecraft has been around for a while. I'm really interested to see where this goes. Obviously, maybe not obviously, I care a lot about privacy. I do not have a smart speaker in my life. But yeah, they might just change my opinion. So yeah, also it looks cute. I like it. It's got sort of like a little bit of almost a retro vibe, retro futuristic. It looks like something from like a sci-fi original series in like 2010. It's got that vibe, which I like. So yeah, check it out. I would really love to see them be super successful and see more like this. And I have no relationship to this company whatsoever besides just thinking they're cool. So yeah. All right. So IP stuff. Was there? I feel like, oh, I had another one here. Oh no. I thought that was out of order. One sec. I may have done a whoopsie. There should be another link in here. Let me see if I can find it. Hold up. I'm just gonna take a second to see if I can find this really quickly. Because there should have been another article in here about IP and copyright. I grouped them. I did group them. Just checking if I can find it really quick. Yes, here it is. Okay. Sorry for the whiff splash of topic. So this is a Twitter thread from Matt Wilson, MSW, who is at MSW _MSW_ on Twitter, socio-technical systems engineer at Amazon and free and open source advocate. And I will say I'm an open source person. I'm not quite a FOSS person. They're a little bit more hardcore than I am. If you're not familiar with there's ideological differences there, but you know, I generally respect them. I think that particularly as we start to talk more as a field about open source, and a lot of people who are sort of using open source as a rallying cry and perhaps a marketing point, but are not, you know, ethically or I don't want to say ethically, but like foundationally are not aligned with the primary principles of open source, may not be familiar with sort of some of this history. So this is all in, you know, in response to this tweet from Halvar Flake. Trained weights are not copyrightable works. I know us nerds are so used to license.txt that we think we can stick that on anything it matters, but that's not reality. Software only fell under copyright in 1980. And then Matt responded to this. Although copyright protections for software didn't really exist in the USA until the early 1980s, it didn't stop IBM from licensing their software in the late 1960s. Important thing to know here, IBM had a lot of money to throw at lawyers, continues to. Copyright isn't the only lever that can be used to monopolize works and rein consumers of those works. Probably rein in consumers of those works. I think it's important to know the reasons why copyright exists. Understanding the public policy objectives are important, and we often focus on copyright as it is today rather than the societal objectives. And to be perfectly frank, current IP law around copyright in the US was shaped in no small part by Disney, the company, because they wanted to maintain copyright and control over characters. So a lot of the changes in copyright since, you know, the 50s have been certainly to the benefit of specific corporations. Cory Doctorow here, he's quoting a tweet from Cory Doctorow. Copyright does not protect the fruits of your hard work. It just doesn't. No matter what you've heard, the legal basis for copyright in US law and its international treaties is to protect creativity, not effort, right? So even if you've worked very hard, that is not what's being protected. It is your creative ideas. And Matt responds to this: spending a lot of time, money, energy, and resources to train a machine learning model doesn't automatically make it something that is protected by copyright. Copyright rewards creativity, not effort or expense. Maybe it applies, maybe it doesn't. Does that matter? And I would say, you know, that is part of the reason why a lot of these tech companies have really, again, being a little bit jaded here, have really started pushing the field towards working primarily or exclusively on these extremely large language models that even if they're not protected by copyright, I can't afford to train GPT-3. You can't afford to train GPT-3. If you can, I guess subscribe to me as a monthly supporter if you've got that much cash kicking around. So the size of the model is what is protecting their work, not necessarily the IP law. It's a functional barrier rather than a legal one. Assuming it doesn't, there may be other provisions of law that can't be used to achieve the same basic goal for the producer of the work, to rein in the users of the work towards specific behaviors, be it paying royalties or prohibiting use in hazardous applications. And I think it's important to recognize that one of the free and open source software movements, again, this is FOSS, not just OS, they are slightly different, objectives, at least for some of us, speaking for myself, was to moderate the reign of software producers hold over software users, probably the reign that software producers hold over software users, right? Like the person who produces the software has very tight controls over how you use it, and that is part of the reason that the FOSS movement exists, to prevent that. And there's a sort of another quoted tweet with a discussion of the rail licenses, where, reading from that quoted tweet by Van L, I noticed they claim both copyright and patent grants, apply to the model, derivatives of the model, and complementary material, and then grant a copyright license to the model and derivatives. So, you know, more discussion about that. And Van L here is a IP and open source lawyer at Taylor English and general counsel of the Python Software Foundation. So definitely someone who would know about this topic. It's interesting to me to see differing policies applied when using different types of work when training very large models, imagery versus music versus open source. So this is something I brought up before. So this is a quote tweet, which it itself has a quote of dance diffusion, of text describing dance diffusion. So dance diffusion is built on datasets composed entirely of copyright-free and voluntarily provided music and audio samples. Because diffusion models are prone to memorization and overfitting, releasing a copyright model trained on copyrighted data could potentially result in legal issues. It is not the case that training, you're right, those same legal issues are going to be present with text, they're going to be present with images, they're going to be present with videos, they're going to be present with software code. The difference here is that the rights holders of the music are record companies, and they are extremely litigious. They've got a lot of money for lawyers, and they are not afraid to throw it around, right? So those of you who are around in the 90s and early 2000s for the, you know, anti-privacy things, they ruined some people's lives for pirating single songs, and the willingness of record companies to do, you know, use the legal system to do violence against people who they think are infringing on their rights is difficult to overstate, certainly in the US. So why would you treat music data different than images? Well, the copyright holders for images are individual artists who are, you will be surprised to learn, not really known for having a lot of money and resources and lawyers at their beck and call, unlike the rights holders for the music, which is usually the record companies, which do very much have those things, and the software source code, where the people who are going to be the most litigious about the software source code are the people who would not open source it in the first place, right? So the question is, like, to what degree are open source maintainers willing to go to bat for their... Thank you, Benson. To what degree... Okay, that should help a little bit. Yeah, Cognition says, I remember Napster being such a huge story when I was a kid who'd barely even heard of copyright. Yeah, if you're unfamiliar with the sort of the way that that went down, it was wild. And I mean, honestly, I kind of feel like it works. Like, I haven't, certainly when talking to people substantially younger than me, music piracy isn't even kind of really a thing on their radar. They really consume music through streaming services that pay royalties, predominantly to record companies. So yeah. Potato Fire says he's angry at the music industry. I mean, he's not. He'll bark at anyone, whether or not you own a record company. Yes. And we talked last week about the, ongoing investigation into, or like preparing to bring a lawsuit against GitHub for Copilot for infringing on, the licenses of open source projects. So TBD how that goes down, but it's very telling to me that the difference here is really, how likely they are to get in trouble rather than like, differences in the actual objects that they are interacting with. So, yep. Anyway, big long discussion there. And the reason that I had this right before this is because, so I mentioned the record industry and how they are particularly litigious and have deep pockets for lawyers, and they are gearing up. So this is a Vice article from the Motherboard subheading section. I don't know the news terms, by Samantha Cole, C-O-L-E, that was published on October 21st. The RIAA says AI music generators will be trained on copyrighted music the same way popular image generators are based on billions of images taken by artists. So the music industry's lobbying arm claims that services using machine learning to alter tracks are infringing on artist rights. So they are, starting to pour money into lobbying. I'm sure we're going to start seeing court cases as well. So I think the near medium future of IP law and machine learning is really going to be spearheaded by potentially open source developers, but almost certainly the record industry because they got a lot to lose. Yep. Whereas visual artists who don't have that degree of power in this situation, which honestly, like, this is not something individual musical artists are doing. The individual music artists also do not have a lot of power in this situation. But that's sort of the landscape. Cognition says, I still use services like LimeWire and FrostWire nervously for many years after that, but nowadays Spotify bridges the gap, which I'm ambivalent about. Yeah. And I think there's, one nice thing is that it is much easier to give money directly to musical artists, right? So if any of you use Bandcamp, that's a great way to give money directly to musical artists. Spotify even has a feature where you can like tip specific artists. It's not available for all artists, but it's available for some of them. And like, I've used it. Definitely in the past. So I also, just like as a person, I deeply believe in paying artists for their work and the value of artistic labor. And I want it to be something that continues to exist in our society, which means I want it to be a thing that people can do and also eat and also pay rent. Yeah, like my little sort of like waving channel icon I commissioned an artist for, and yes, I paid them like you should, at a reasonable hourly rate. Anyway, but yeah, so this is, again, just a professional news. It's going to affect all of us as developers. It's coming very soon, and it's going to affect all of this generative work, which I gotta be honest, I still don't understand how they think they're going to make money, given that they're going up against really entrenched interests like this. I think mostly they're making money by dazzling VCs so far, which is like certainly a strategy. Luke says, Bandcamp is great. I have all my music on there. Ah, are you under Luke Davis? I'll pop the link in. Unless you are talking about your personal music collection and not music that you are writing and sharing. I don't think that's you. There is a Luke Davis on Bandcamp. If it is you, it is a picture in which you look extremely different. Maybe I would be surprised. I don't have face spineless, but sometimes when people dramatically change their look, I don't recognize them anymore. But this looks like a different person. And in that sort of general IP who's making money off of this. Well, here is a commercial thing. Shutterstock will start saying AI-generated stock imagery with help from OpenAI. Where did OpenAI get all their pictures from? Did they have, what's the copyright like on their stuff? Who knows? So you may remember that Getty Images very recently said that they were not going to be dealing with generated art at all for legal issues. It looks like Shutterstock is definitely willing to jump into the fray. Cognition says, if the suit is successful, does it not serve as a precedent against generative models trained on other media as well? It's a good question. I don't know that there's actually a suit currently. I think they're mainly looking at lobbying. So I think they're trying for legislation rather than a current suit. Let me see. It has a response to a request from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. So yeah, I don't think it's currently a legal suit, but like, yeah, and especially things that remove parts of music tracks, they say, are in particular infringing on copyright. So from a computer vision standpoint, that would be things like magically getting the outline of stuff. There's also, so the Shutterstock story, this is from The Verge. It's by James Vincent. It was published October 25th. Also has this interesting doing where they're creating a contributors fund, right? I'm just scrolling down. Trying to find more information on this contributors fund. The contributor fund will pay Shutterstock users when their content is used to train an AI model. They are banning AI art uploaded to its platform by third parties, right? So OpenAI has exclusive access now. Banning third-party AI-generated art will also help protect its own business by funneling users towards its DALL-E integration. So this is something that the reporter is saying, but like also I agree. The creation of contributor fund suggests it foresees criticism and possible damage to its reputation. Again, reading that. Given the collective nature of generative content, we developed a revenue share compensation model where contributors whose content was involved in training generative art models will receive a share of the earnings from datasets and downloads of all AI-generated content produced on our platform. Contributors will receive a share of the entire contract value paid by platform partners. The share individual contributors receive will be proportionate to the volume of their content and metadata that is included in the purchase data sets. So this is sort of how they're getting around it. And I don't know if it's something that people can opt into or out of. And obviously DALL-E is already trained, and removing data from a trained model is non-trivial and not solved. So, question mark. Shutterstock says these payouts will be distributed every 6 months and will include both earnings from data deals as well as royalties from generic licensing on Shutterstock. The company gave no indication of what a typical payout might be. So that's sort of what they're doing at the moment. And we'll see what that goes like. Cognition says, I just assumed they were suing because it's what they do. Oh, I'm sure they will. I would, if I were a betting person, I would certainly take that bet. I like the idea of a royalty framework or similar if it's opt-in. I agree, that's the thing, it has to be opt-in, but these models have already been trained, right? They did something non-consensually, right? They used people's art non-consensually and potentially in violation of their copyright. The potentially there is because I don't think it's settled law. I don't think it's settled case law, and I don't think there's relevant legislation around it yet, certainly in the United States. So this feels, I would also say, not a lawyer, talk to a lawyer. But if you are someone whose work was used in this way on Shutterstock and they offer you money from the fund, I would talk to a lawyer before accepting it because it may preclude you from future class action lawsuits. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I would read everything over with your lawyer, but this feels like a way to stop themselves from getting sued if I just sort of guessed about what they're doing here. And also, they got lots of publicity. OpenAI got lots of publicity, and like, oh, look, it's a commercial use of this type of model that has sort of like questionable commercial use. So Cognition says the cat is most of the way out of the bag, so to speak. Yep, 100%. Anyway, so that's currently sort of the state of the stuff in terms of this professional stuff. And I know that, obviously this is more around music and more around images, but it's gonna, I do not think that text models are going to be treated differently here. I do not think that speech models are going to be treated differently from music models. So whatever happens in those fields is almost certainly going to affect us. And society as a whole, right? Which arguably more important, but yeah, this is stuff that's important for professional technologists. All right, next up, oh yeah, so this is from MIT Technology Review, How AI Digital Twins Help Weather the World's Supply Chain Nightmare. It is by Will Douglas Heaven, and it was written October 26, 2021, published then. And I just thought I'd bring this up because like, a practical use for counterfactuals. It's just kind of cool. That's it, that's the whole thing. I read this and I was like, I know about those. Kind of cool that they are using them. All right, next up, so this is, again, very practical stuff. This is from H2OAI, which is a company that does AutoML and like tooling for people doing ML engineering and data science, if you're not familiar with them. They hire a lot of Kaggle Grandmasters as sort of like one of their big claims to fame. And it's a database-like ops benchmark. This page aids to benchmark various database-like tools popular in open source data science. It runs regularly against the very latest versions of these packages and automatically updates. We provide this as a service to both developers of those packages and to users, and then they have more information about this from 2019. So just happened to run across my my dash. Also, it looks like they have some errors here. So dplyr had an internal error, pandas had an out of memory error, dask had an out of memory error, arrow had an internal memory error, but yeah. He says, does all data generation stuff like music, video, and image belong to generative machine learning? Yeah, I'd say so. I would call it more like a class of techniques than a field, because I don't know if there's like a publication venue for generative machine learning that's not also just a publication venue for machine learning. I think it tends to be divided by subdiscipline. But yes, I would sort of put all the generative stuff together. And I imagine legislators are going to treat it as one big bucket, if I had to guess again. I guess it also depends on whose lobbyists are in the room and how much sway they have. But if you're interested in this sort of thing, I think it's, if you're interested in using any of these tools, I think it might be helpful. Although, of course, it looks like there are some errors here. So good to keep an eye on. And the data.table is pretty fast. Data.table is another set of R packages that's designed to be very performant, but a little bit less user-friendly in my experience. But they're fast, which is the claim to fame, and sure is. All right, next up, we have, so this was a really interesting product decision. So this is from Vox, Instagram surprising strategy from Julie's, tell them to be nice. So it's about nudging. New features that nudge users to rethink posting. Mean comments or messages seem to work in some cases. And it's by Shirin Gaffary, Gaffary, and was published October 20th. Yeah, so this is really interesting because the previous work on nudging and reducing bullying and hate speech had found that when users were nudging each other, it only worked if the account that was doing the nudging appeared to be a powerful account and have a lot of followers. But it looks like it's much more effective when the platform itself is doing the nudging. And I am wondering if potentially part of this has to do with the fact that, you know, if the platform is nudging you, perhaps they would also flag your account if you posted that thing. So I wonder if there's an interaction between the power differential between users and the platform and the nudge itself. But again, according to their statistics, so this is sort of like stuff that they are reporting, it does seem to help a little bit. However, not all the way. So a citation here is that a report that Instagram failed to act on 90% of over 8,700 abusive messages received by several high-profile women, including actress Amber Heard. And I would say that my experience on Instagram has been that it is very hard to get hate speech removed on Instagram, and it's a little bit easier on other platforms. Yes, so the nudging is obviously not gonna solve the problem 100%, but Meta says, and again, this is based on their internal measures, that after it started warning users before they posted a potentially offensive comment, about 50% of people edited or deleted their offensive comment. So it seems like it might be helping a little bit, which is interesting. Again, I think it probably is helping in part because of the power differential between users and the platform. But yeah, interesting product decision. I don't know if you can still hear my dog or not. Next up, we have a video, and I will pop this in the chat. I'm assuming this is, yeah. So this seems like it's a little bit more of a database migration guide, but it looks like it looks pretty good if you were looking for a resource about that. So you can check that out. Also, another thing that's sort of been going around recently has been the clip interrogator. So this, I don't actually know if this is the canonical citation for it, but this is the one that I found that looked like the most popular. And it is a program that uses OpenAI Clip to get labels for an image from a wide variety tests to give an image around a variety of artists, mediums, and styles to study how the different models see the content of the image. It also combines the results with a blip caption to suggest a text prompt to create more images similar to what was given. So sort of like a auditing tool if you are interested. And I believe it's also on Hugging Face. Clip Interrogator by Pharmapsychotic is the main developer, I believe. And also this is licensed under the MIT license. Next up, so this is something I've been thinking about also, and I saw Chris Albin talked about it. Chris is he's the director of machine learning at Wikimedia and also well-known machine learning Twitter user, I would say. And has apparently been working with AI writing tools. So reading from his tweet, I've been tinkering with AI writing tools, and here's my biggest takeaways. Sick. That SIC, I am reading precisely. I think that is probably a language error. Amount of low quality content used to flood Google results and drive ad impressions will approach infinity, 1. And 2, internet users will flock to where the humans are, Reddit, Wikipedia, and Quora. He works for Wikipedia, so obviously that's, a little bit aspirational, but I also don't think it's necessarily wrong. So these are some examples of, I think generated content. So one of them is top 10 machine learning tips for beginners. 1, start with a simple model and dataset. 2, build your own toy dataset to play with. 3, use a technique called cost validation to evaluate your models. 4, try different learning algorithms. 5, don't be afraid to use more data. So I'm believing this is all generated. And it goes on. Robbie says, if I observe the data, e.g. I cost a coin HHT, I made 3 models. I'm not entirely sure where that came from. Sorry, Robbie. Just talking about some classic statistical stuff. And there's some other examples. An example looks like it is using GPT-3 of something generated, what happened with Elon Musk, where it's generating an article about him being accused of fraud by the US Securities and Exchange Commission, which I believe did happen, but I don't know if any of the rest of the other details here are correct. Robbie says, in generative machine learning, I force the CPU to select model 1. Is this type of thing we do in generative ML? Interesting. I mean, generative ML is the general class of tasks where you are generating output. And yeah, it can involve some human filtering and cherry picking as well. And then we have this one, best credit cards in 2023, and then just like some, generated content that's around that. Yes. Continuing to read from Chris's thread. Sorry, having a hard time keeping on topic here. For clarification, this isn't a long-term prescriptive, but a 2 to 5 prediction. I'm guessing 2 to 5 month, possibly a year. There are so many net positive benefits to tools like GPT-3. There are some, But a net negative is bad actors flooding the net with trillions of pages of generated content. I've certainly already run into this, particularly if you've searched for anything to buy online recently. The amount of like fake reviews that are clearly generated, and you can tell that they're clearly generated because they are non-coherent. That just have like affiliate links that people are using as a way to make money is wild. It is extremely common, and they're doing really good SEO, unfortunately, which I guess I know that SEO is always a little bit of a power struggle between the search engine and the optimizer, but yeah, continuous. Cognition says reviews have not been trustable in my mind for years. Yeah. Yep, and unfortunately there's a clear commercial incentive for people to continue to do it. Yep. Continuing to read from Chris's thread, maybe it isn't precisely where the humans are, but where guarantees around content quality rather than GPT-3 content farms are. Yep. So, yep, this is something that I definitely think about when we talked about I have a video I did a while ago on the harms of abusive use of language models. One of the big ones is just like annoyance, reducing the utility of systems, right? Like, because of the failure to protect the United States phone network against spam callers, I no longer pick up my phone, right? Like, I was at one point getting 20, 30 spam phone calls a day, which means that for me, it is no longer an effective mode of communication, especially with number spoofing. Like, if you are going to call me, you have to schedule it ahead of time and like text me right before you call me so I know that it's you and not someone pretending to be to use your number. And I do worry that we're going to get the same thing with like the internet. And then of course, because we're all using Common Crawl, it's going to get folded right back into the training data. Yeah. Anyway, Tom says GPT-3 for search is interesting. I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about this, but like also BERT is already folded into Google search. It has been for a while. To my goodness, but the door opened to my room opened a tiny bit and my dog lost his dang mind. I think we may have somebody at the door. I will ignore it for now because I'm doing this. Yeah. Cognition says, I still get daily phone calls from my persistent friend, Mr. Likely, first name span. Yes, definitely a continuous issue. So yeah, I worry that the same thing is going to happen to the internet, right? To the existence of blogs. It's already happening to like books on online marketplaces. Like a lot of books that you can buy are just garbage. They're not actual books written by actual people, which is an issue. So, yep. Also, a tweet. So Deb Raji, who is another fabulous researcher who does great work. Luke says, my dog doesn't like bright. But here's the thing. I don't think, like, in and of themselves, large language models are an issue, right? They're tools. I think the issue is really, it's emergent effects, right? Like, how does this interact with people in the world, and how can we, protect those people? And how can we be responsible in our day-to-day work as language technologists? And I think that it is not trivial, and it's not simple, and it's going to mean, that we work with the rest of civil society, that we work with regulators, that we work with, researchers, that we work with, special interest groups, if we're doing it right. Or we can go down the other route as a field, which is just that we just maximize profit and don't care about anything else, and devil take the hindmost. And unfortunately, I think there are people in the field who very much have that ethos and that worldview. And like, I understand, right? Like, from an economic standpoint, a rational actor, but certainly not working towards the sort of world that I want to continue to live in. I would prefer to continue to live in the world where we all cared a lot and tried our best. And I think most people do and are, which I find very heartening. So, yeah. Yeah. All right, next up. So this is sort of the thing that I was mentioning earlier, where there's been a lot of Twitter discussion about, you know, oh, clearly linguistics has never done anything. Clearly it's not important. And, like, I don't think the majority of people in the field believe that. Certainly, you know, none of these researchers believe it. Certainly, you know, none of these researchers, I realize there's overlap here, like, certainly these people don't believe it because they are using linguistics and what we know from linguistics and the study of language as a you know, scientific discipline to better understand the behavior of these models, even if we don't have a good understanding of necessarily the models themselves due to you know, information. But yes, so just to read from what Deb says, her Twitter is Raginio, Raginio. Annoyed by this latest trend of machine learning researchers insisting that they absolutely do not need anything that came before, it's obvious that linguistics, statistics, neuroscience, etc. was important inspiration for critical paradigm shifts, even when things didn't work, right? It's interesting. There's sort of I've also seen this, a kind of a trend in not just ahistoricity, like not just not thinking about history or not enjoying history, but also like, you know, the famous Newton quote about if I have seen further, it is because I have stood on the shoulders of giants, proudly proclaiming that your feet are on the ground and that you've never stood on anything, which, I mean, if you are, you know, building your computer hardware from copper that you mined yourself, perhaps is the case, but I don't think that's true of any humans right now. Certainly nobody doing machine learning research, and the sort of like failure to understand this, the fact that science is a social activity and the effects of social networks that are not directly adjacent to your own on your own work. And I don't know, it's poor scholarship and also just like, I don't know. It feels very defensive to me. It feels very defensive to be like, no, actually our field is the only one that matters and everything that we do is completely independent and separate. Like, you know, I deserve to work on whatever I work on and I can just waltz in and I don't have to talk to the subject matter experts and it's not going to matter, in a way that just like leads to an enormous waste of time and effort and money and compute, and is, I don't know. Non-collegial, right? Like just bad science. You gotta talk to your colleagues. And, you know, understand that the portion of human knowledge that you hold, even as if you are creating new human knowledge, is like a very small piece of the pie. There's lots of the rest of the pie, and your pie slice touches other pie slices, whether you like it or not, which is as true for me as it is for everyone else, right? So anyway. Tom says, I am stupid, my model is clever. The more stupid I am, the cleverer my model is. I'm assuming that's a quote that I do not know the source for, but yeah. Anyway, I would just, you know, presumably if you've been listening to me for this long, you also appreciate the rich diversity of human knowledge and how it enriches all of us and would not, you know, claim that you and only you are working in a total vacuum. No man is an island. That is a quote from John Donne, the poet. But of course poetry isn't important or good. Anyway, I don't know that I actually want to go into this one too deep. I'll pop the link to this in the chat if you're interested in reading it more. But it's basically a piece. So this is by Philip Marcolin about scientific mean content of amateurs, poison for profit, and the manipulation of public opinion, which is basically on the issue of scientific meme content and how that is directly leading to disinformation. And the focus here is, of course, maybe not, of course, the focus that he is writing on is on, you know, COVID, but I think it also definitely applies in the machine learning space. You know, we talked to Jordan recently on the channel, who is one of the machine learning YouTubers that I really like, but a lot of people who are doing machine learning content on YouTube are intentionally or unintentionally misleading people about system capabilities in particular. And I think it is harming public perception. Oh, Tom says, not a quote. It's what machine learning researchers might think regarding linguistics. Yeah. Unfortunately. And I would say, like, often when a cognition says it was such a good read, oh, good. Yeah, it was particularly interesting and relevant, I think, for us in our current situation as a field. Where was I going with this? Misinformation, misleading people about the ability of our systems. Why would people do that? Because it gets views, right? And in the attention economy, that's what matters. And like, I completely understand. I am not a very good YouTuber, right? Like, I am not doing the YouTube genre in the way that it is usually done. I go too into depth in things. I take things too slowly. There's too much, nuance going on. I talk about a lot of topics in a video. I get it. I also do most of my content live because I am doing a lot of jobs, actually. I've got a lot going on in my life, so I don't have a lot of time for editing. And yeah, like, I 100% get that I am not doing YouTube good. But also, I think that that's kind of what's necessary to, particularly as professionals, build our understanding. We gotta get messing. We gotta, stick our little noses in a bunch of little tree trunks and be like, what's going on in here? What's going on here? What's going on in here? So, yeah. Anyway, good piece. Moving on. Oh, yeah. So this is something I think about all the time. Speaking of the influence of different fields. So this is a piece from the MIT Technology Review by Eric Sherman that came out October 26, 2022. And the title is Everything Dies, Included Information. Digitization can help stem the tide of entropy, but won't stop it. And it is about the challenges of preserving digital information. So, I don't think I've ever mentioned this on the channel before, but one of my sort of interest and research areas, particularly in undergraduate, was library science, old books, and archival preservation, right? So I worked in an antiquarian bookstore where we worked with old books. I interned in the special collections at the library at William and Mary, where I went to my undergraduate, doing document preservations of ephemera from the university presidential, not US presidential. They got both. It's a good special collections. University presidential backlog. So sort of like sorting and preserving documents. I also, worked in, did some book binding. So I was really interested and continue to be really interested in the history and preservation of information. And I will tell you right now, if you really care about something, make sure that it is printed on acid-free paper and stored in a climate-controlled area, because digital information decays at a much, 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 much faster rate than other types of physical media, right? So if any of you are particularly interested in like lost media, that's a big... there's an area where I think the YouTube community is pretty cool and interesting. There's sort of a lot of general interest in here, like lost episodes of TV shows, lost episodes of movies, lost movies. Is sort of one big area, lost episodes of radio shows, etc. And all of the issues with film and audio recordings are worse in the digital space, right? So, and I think you can probably, you all work with computers. I imagine at some point in the past you have used a program that you can no longer use for whatever reason, right? Like maybe you don't have the computer system that it was interoperable with, or maybe you have the computer system, but the charger's broken, so you can't charge the computer. Or maybe it's written in a, proprietary text encoding. All very real things that happen, that as support for those things decay, the information itself goes away and becomes inaccessible. Another good example of this is MMOs being taken offline, right? Like when the servers go down for the last time and that data is erased, it is gone forever unless someone's made a mirror of it. And that's, then you're recording, again, IP issues with preservation, and it continues to be an issue. So one of the things they talk about in here is the IP issues that in particular the Internet Archive has faced. The internet, great example, right? The internet is a constantly changing place. The information comes and goes, and some of it just disappears forever, and we're never going to be able to save everything or archive everything. We're never even going to be able to archive everything that's important. And the rate of decay is so high that it is very challenging to be an archivist right now. Very challenging. Something that I think is also relevant in this space is, y'all remember, you may or may not remember this, but at one point, Twitter and the US Library of Congress said that they were going to keep a copy of every tweet in the US Library of Congress. They no longer do that. There is no feasible way for them to handle that amount of information. There's no way for people who like make their accounts private to have information removed from there. So obviously there's privacy and consent concerns, but there's also just like the volume is too much and the rate of decay is too quick. So something that I think about a lot is, you know, it's all going away, and it's all going away at a much faster pace than it ever has in the past. And there's more of it than there was in the past. It here just being sort of like information, recordings, even just thinking about text. And the impermanent nature of the digital record, when we as technologists often assume that it is not, or you know, honestly, perhaps we know better than most people how impermanent it is. Anyway, something I think about a lot. I don't have anything else to say besides, you know, it's a thing, it's happening. Yeah. Robbie says, make AI software do my video editing. I mean, I use tools to speed up the process, but it still, you know, takes a human touch. IPS for the win, yeah. Alexei says, I still want to play an early 2000 indie Russian game, which doesn't really work on modern computers. It's an extremely small community of people who still care about that game. Yeah, and all of us have a thing that we don't share with anyone else that we're talking to right now that's the same, right? Like I guarantee we all have like that one blog we wish we could find again that's gone forever. We all have that one video game we wish we could play again that just is not playable anymore. We all have that one computer system we loved that, you know, is no longer supported, we can no longer use, right? Anyway. A little memento mori for you for your digital age. The data goes away, all of it, forever, and it's extremely challenging. And not to poo-poo archivists who are doing enormous work in this field and absolutely doing the best they can and are pillars of society. And if I could give every cent that OpenAI has to archivists, I would. I would absolutely just like loop, or even just librarians in general, but. Yeah. Robbie says, we can store data in DNA. Microsoft is already doing it. Yeah, that is a way to store some data, but fun thing about DNA is that also not permanent, very much degrades, right? In fact, if it didn't, we wouldn't be here. Punisher says, an ennui for the information age. Indeed, indeed. A great example from YouTube. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Jenna Marbles. I think she was mainly, you know, popular with sort of women in my age bracket. But she was a YouTube creator who one day just deleted most of her videos and left. And they're gone now, right? And there may be some mirror somewhere, but like, Alexi says, I remember some claim that NLP tech scales way worse than the NLP data produced. Soon it will be impossible to index everything. It already is. It already is. Yeah. All right. Next up, so this is another sort of product-y thing, and also, you know, malicious uses of AI. So we talked about, again, in the malicious uses of generative models video, one of them is in deception and impersonation. And in this case, it's not really impersonation, but it's a story that Lauren Good published in Wired. I uncovered an army of fake men on Hinge, and I believe actually Hinge responded today that they were going to start doing video identification of everybody on the site to make sure that they are people, but she had an experience where there are a lot of people with, you know, generated bios and generated avatars that were fronts for real people who are running scams, particularly pig fattening scams. So yeah, just again, I don't want to get too deep into it, but it's happening, right? Like I recently got in a discussion with Twitter where someone was like, all those people who are like, oh, AI safety, blah, blah, well, not AI safety, AI ethics, people are going to deceive people. Who's actually deceiving people? It's happening. Anyway, politics. Very short politics section today. Hey, old player, good to see you. Cognition says, I remember Jenna Marbles. Yeah. Yes. I did a lot of fun videos that changed a lot over time. Politics. All right. So first, I think that actually should have been in practical. Never mind. Practical. One last thing. Yes. So there's apparently this new foundation, the Farama, F-A-R-A-M-A Foundation, that is a 501c3 nonprofit designed to house major open source reinforcement libraries in a neutral nonprofit body. We are a large international team in charge of many of the most installed libraries in the field, such as Gymnasium and Petting Zoo, and are open to new projects when it's a good fit. Yes, and they have a Discord. So I saw this and was sort of like interested, and it looks like a lot of the people who are working with it come from universities. So core team includes Jordan Terry from the University of Maryland, Mark Towers from the University of Southampton, Ariel Kwiatkowski from École Polytechnique, which I believe is in Paris, Fengu from University of Maryland, and etc. There's quite a few people working on this, and it looks like they all, NIST is not a university, that's the National Institute of Science and Technology. But not like, I'm pretty sure that's a US government thing. Lisbon, Imperial College, London, Omega Corps, we have 1 commercial, Connectome.design, 2 commercial, and Prima, I believe, is also commercial. So we've got 3, I think, folks there who have commercial interests, but it looks like pretty much everyone else is at a university. National Institute of Standards and Technology, not Science and Technology. Yes. Physical Sciences Laboratory, a non-regulatory agency of the United States Department of Commerce. Its mission is to promote American innovation and industrial competitiveness. Industrial competitiveness is what you get when you're jostling for a drink at a goth club. It was a bad joke. Don't worry if you don't get it. It was not funny to begin with. Yeah, so just FYI, any of you working in reinforcement learning, long-term feasibility of open source projects, especially that require hosting, is always sort of like an issue. So yeah, interested to see what they do. Hopefully, there have been a recent line of sort of like nonprofit open source focused / open source focused organizations that have been founded in the field that have kind of poisoned this well for me a little bit. But hopefully they can turn the tide and be what they say they're going to be. Best wishes to them. Now politics. So first up, we actually just missed this. I think it was yesterday, day before yesterday. Tuesday. There was a workshop on cross-border digital policies for Africa. So any of you in Africa are working in that context, this might be of use for you. And it is a workshop on, they were sharing findings basically. So this is sort of like recommendations, etc. And why policy coordination between African countries would be beneficial, and what sort of shape it might take. So yeah, if you're interested in learning more, they have the recordings available online. Next up, so also in politics, this is from CNNBC. It's by Iman Javers, I guess, published and updated on the 24th. So the title is How Google's former CEO Eric Schmidt helped write AI laws in Washington without publicly disclosing investments in AI startups, which is a conflict of interest. 5 months after Schmidt was appointed to the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, he made a little-noticed private investment in an initial seed round of financing for a startup company called Beacon. It was the first of a handful of direct investments he would make in AR startup companies during his tenure as chairman of the AI Commission. Well, there's no indication that Schmidt broke any ethics rules or did anything unlawful. unlawful, government ethics advisors say his investments prevented a huge conflict of interest, which I would agree. So, yep, that's happening. So this is from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a digital rights organization. Also does not have certainly a position that I would agree with in terms of privacy. So this is from 2009, so it is from a while ago, but I think it is relevant in this context. Google CEO Eric Schmidt dismisses the importance of privacy. So he was asked for a CNBC interview about whether users should be sharing information with Google as if it were a trusted friend, and he responded, if you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place, which I would say is a very naive in the, the best reading of that is that it is very naive, right? Like there are, plenty of things that we all do in life that we do not necessarily want to be general knowledge, but that does not mean that they are bad things to do, right? Like, I don't announce every time I go to use the restroom, for example, but that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be doing it, So, yep. Luke says, Eric, don't be evil, Schmidt. Robbie says, so would you be more interested to know what the effect of machine learning systems on people's lives are rather than how it works? I mean, yeah, in general. I think we also, as a field, know more about how it works. Well, a little bit fuzzy with deep learning than how it affects people's lives in a sort of, again, emergent ways, right? When we have these unexpected effects. I think they're both important. But yep. So hopefully his position has changed, especially since he is, helping to draft legislation, but certainly worrying. Phew. Now this is really interesting. So this is from New York City, and it is a proposed rule on the use of automated employment decision tools. And I believe, so the comment date just closed, and basically the proposed rule would clarify the requirements for the use of automated employment decision tools within New York City, and notices to employees and candidates for employment regarding the use of the tool, the bias audit for the tool, and the required published results of the bias audit. So obviously a lot of people work in New York City, so if this does get passed and they're requiring published audits for every hiring tool, automated hiring tool being used in New York City, that's going to have big ripple effects. So really interested to see what happens here, and there's a lot of comments on it as well, and I'll post the link in case folks are interested. And then finally, so oh my gosh, goodbye. So this is from the UK, I believe. So this is from The Guardian, and it's by Alex Hearn, and was published October 25th, 2022. Information Commissioner warns firms over, quote, emotional analysis technologies. And quote, companies should not make meaningful decisions based on technology not backed by science, excuse me. So basically the Information Commissioner, which I believe is a government position in the UK, has warned companies to steer clear of, quote, emotional analysis technologies or face fines because of the, quote, pseudoscientific nature of the field, which I would agree with. There's, claims that you can detect people's internal state using computer vision have been overstated by people selling the things, let me tell you. Let me just say it that way. It's the first time a regulator has issued a blanket warning on the ineffectiveness of the new technology, says Stephen Bonner, the deputy commissioner, but one that is justified by the harm that could be caused if companies made meaningful decisions based on meaningless data. There's a lot of investment and engagement around biometric attempts to detect emotions, he said. Some such technologies attempt to infer information about mental states using data such as the shininess of someone's skin or fleeting micro-expressions on their face. Unfortunately, these technologies don't seem to be backed by science, Bonner says. That's also my understanding. That's quite concerning because we're aware of quite a few organizations looking into these technologies as possible ways to make pretty important decisions, to identify whether people might be fraudsters, whether job applicants are worthy of getting that role. And there don't seem to be any sense that these work. So yes, and of course, you know, we talked about gender shades and Abeba Bahrain's paper in Nature earlier, and of course most of these systems computer vision systems do tend to work less well, you know, have less consistent results for Black folks in particular. So definitely potential not only for, you know, using junk science, but also for doing disproportionate harm to Black folks. All right, that's all the politics, not a lot this week. Ethics. Carnation says, let's make a high-tech polygraph, but even worse. Even so. Also, polygraphs are also not actually capable of doing what they say they do, if you were unaware. All right. So this, I mean, we've talked about this for a while. This is from CNN Business. These artists found out their work was used to train AI. Now they're furious, by Rachel Metz, and published Friday, October 21st. So yeah, just basically more evidence that artists do not like the way that their works were used non-consensually in a way that could harm them. Right, so here we have an image of colorful forest that was produced using stable diffusion. And the subtitle says it resembles Hanson's work, particularly with its colors and simulated brush strokes. And if I scroll down, there's an example of a 2021 oil painting that looks very similar, that has the same sort of brushwork, that has the same sort of color palette and same sort of outline. So visually extremely similar. In a discussion with this artist, the artist is like, yeah, I hate this. I hate that this is being done. And I did not have a choice to not have it be done to me in my work. Alexi says, I'm looking forward to discussion on Russian web brigades and how to use NLP to counter them. Yeah, we talked a little bit about brigading in the video I keep referencing. Maybe it's a little bit gauche, but I'm just going to go find that video on my channel and then post it in the link so you guys can have it on, malicious uses of, in particular, natural language generation, but, it obviously applies to, computer vision as well. So yes, if you're interested in seeing the video I keep referring to, I just posted the link for you. People don't like it. Also, sort of in the deception general topic, I guess. So this is a piece from the Wall Street Journal by Patrick Coffey, like the beverage, updated October 25th. And the title is Deep Fakes, quote, of celebrities have begun appearing in ads with or without their permission. Digital simulations of Elon Musk, Tom Cruise, Leo DiCaprio, and others have shown up in ads as the image melding technology grows more popular and presents the marketing industry with new legal and ethical questions. And then there is an image. A recent ad for real estate startup ReAlpha stars a, quote, deepfake version of Tesla chief Elon Musk, which I believe was done without his consent. Not a person I like. You may have picked up on that from our various decisions. Pretty high up, in fact, on the list of people I don't like, but this is still wrong, right? Like, using people's likeness to sell your product without their permission or knowledge is wrong. Impersonating people using machine learning without their explicit consent to do it is wrong, right? So we talked about James Earl Jones, who's the voice of Darth Vader, being replaced in upcoming productions with a model trained on his voice. This was done with his explicit consent. That I'm fine with. This is not being done with the explicit consent of the people whose images are being used to sell these products. This I'm not fine with. It would be wrong to do it just for like fun, but it's extra wrong to do it when you're profiting off of it. Don't like it. Hate that this is happening. Again, from a consent-based model, clearly unethical. And basically the article is like, well, they're going to keep doing it because they think they can get away with it or make money that they will be sued for. So TBD, I guess. Yeah. So this is a piece from MIT Technology Review by Karen Howe, one of our favorite tech reporters on the channel. She does great work. And this was actually published a while ago, but it came across my feed again, so I thought it was reasonable to bring back up. So this was published March 11, 2021. And the title is How Facebook Got Addicted to Spreading Misinformation. Some of you may have read this when it came out. The company's AI algorithms gave it an insatiable habit for lies and hate speech. So in particular, it upweighted things that made people angry. And got a big emotional reaction out of them. Now the man who built it can't fix the problem, and it's about the Candela, the director of AI at Facebook, being like, well, we can't fix it. I've Pandora'd this box and can't get it closed again. And yep. Speaking of, I don't think, speaking of emergent effects, right? Like, I don't think anyone at Facebook sat down and was like, well, I mean, maybe some of them did, but I think most people at Facebook certainly didn't sit down and be like, hey, well, I want to create a program that intentionally spreads misinformation and misleads people and lies to them. But through perverse incentives, what was preferred and amplified by, content recommendation algorithms had that effect, that emergent effect. So Ravi was talking about knowing about how it works versus how it, has an effect on society. I mean, in a system that has human users, the effect that it has on society and people is part of how it works. It's how it works in context, right? Just like machine learning as a field and specific applications are built in a larger context of other fields and cross-pollination between them. Context is important. Context is extremely important, particularly with language technology, because, as you know, language data is human data. It's all human data. Even the generated data is generated based off of human data. It's not like, computer vision where you can have a camera trap taking pictures of a bear and humans are not involved in the, direct making of the picture, and they're not involved in being a bear that is having a picture taken of it. A bear here being, Ursus major or whatever it is that you're, grizzly bear, actual bear the animal. Right, you have no humans involved, no human in data involved there, but language data is always human data, all of it, 100% of the time. So how it interacts with humans using language in context is part of how the system works. And especially when you have a very large system, especially when you have a general purpose system, when it interacts with society, that is part of how it's working. Anyway. Social sciences are important, y'all. You can't just, you can just, sort of wind up the wind-up toy, put it down the table and watch it walk away. But, what sort of Rube Goldberg machine is it going to set up? If you don't even look around for Rube Goldberg machines before you start, then you're never going to know. Or you'll be like, whoopsie, surprise. Anyway, also, just as an aside, the people who are most hurt by this are not the person who is the head of Facebook AI research, right? He's doing fine, may have a little bit of trouble sleeping at night, but certainly not, having a lot of material harm directly done onto him by this. Cognition says, I refuse to believe it was not known that maximizing engagement would mostly mean amplifying rage. That would require looking at any human user data at all, or thinking about social science, or thinking about psychology. And I know a lot of people in the field who just don't want to do that, and so they don't. Also on the ethics side of things, Cognition says, he looks so sad in this header photo, though. Look how sad he looks. Yeah. Ravi says, I heard AI has its own language. It's not human data. If it is language data, it is human data, right? I think you might be talking about the 2016 Facebook reinforcement chatbot learning thing. which, I mean, the system kind of didn't work. And the main outcome of that study, I would say, is that if you try to have two chatbots talking to each other without a human in the loop, you end up with degenerate, and by degenerate here, I mean unusable, signal-less noise, basically, just like random characters. But yes, lots of people will tell you that. I am telling you as a linguist that that is not the case. As a computational linguist, actually. Or at least I have not yet seen compelling evidence. And this piece is from the markup, and it's a little interactive. Yeah, I'll post the link to this one so you can go through it. But it's a little interactive, data journalism story. And basically, the point here is that depending on where you live in the U.S., and of course this is also true in a global context, your internet speed is going to depend on the wealth of your neighborhood. So wealthiest neighborhoods get better internet speed, poorer neighborhoods get poor internet speed, right? And definitely true in a global context as well. So we talked a while ago about sort of the tech companies building undersea cables to Africa for the explicit purpose of making their internet services faster. So anyway. Capitalism. Capitalism and classism, that's the interacts with everything, including access to basic services. All right. Ugh. So this is from Bloomberg. It is by Katrina Mason and was published October 18th. And the title, looks like some stuff isn't loading, but the title is Neurodiversity Emerges as a Skill in Artificial Intelligence Work. Jordan Wright goes from grocery bagger to inspecting satellite photos. This is the best opportunity I've gotten in my life. So basically the article is about folks who are predominantly autistic, who are now working as data labelers and whose work is directly benefiting the, people who are building the systems that label data is fed into, for, very little money. And I don't think, if this is work that people enjoys and they are fairly compensated, I don't think it's an issue, but I don't think they're being fairly compensated. And I think, labor rights issues in AI as a whole are increasingly pressing and something that is not often the center of the discussion, because the discussion is often happening among well-paid researchers, not all of whom care to know about the low-paid workers upon whom their work rests. Also, if you didn't know, minimum wage in the United States does not apply to people who are disabled. Minimum wage for disabled workers is significantly lower than regular minimum wage. And actually, let's see. Also, if you are on disability in the United States, there are a lot of, restrictions on like how much money you can ever have at a time. I want to say it's like $2,000. And that includes like the value of everything you own. It's, deeply wrong. That's the word. It's deeply wrong. Let me pull it up. Yep, so I'll just give you a citation for this. So this is from 2020, and I believe there has been some update, which is good, but in 2020, according to this NPR article, workers with disabilities can earn just $3.34 an hour. And at that time, I believe federal minimum wage was still $7.25, so half of regular minimum wage to disabled workers. So my, whenever people start talking about like specifically targeting disabled folks, and not every neurodiverse person is disabled, like, I mean, I am dyslexic. I go back and forth on whether or not I call myself disabled. My sensory disability is actually probably more impactful. Well, actually, I don't know that that's true. Anyway, I'm not saying that neurodiversity and disability are exactly the same thing, but I am saying that this smells like potential for labor exploitation, specifically of disabled communities, the disabled community, and I got my eyes on you. Pay your data labelers, and pay them fairly. So, yes. And again, like, I don't think that there is an issue with having people do work that they enjoy and that they are well suited for. For me, certainly meaningful work is something that I require to be, mentally well, just like as a person. And I know that about myself, and I know that that's not true of everybody. The issue here is really like exploitation and who's benefiting the most from this. So jobs better be well paying, fairly paying too. So also on the general topic of, angry content being amplified. So we talked about it being a problem on Facebook, also a problem on TikTok. So Carrie Feisler, who does really fabulous work on sort of the field of, CHI and particularly internet. She's at Colorado University. I think she's in Boulder. Tech ethics law, internet fandom. So has a little introduction here to this Washington Post article about TikTok, and specifically the issue with going viral on TikTok. So the sort of discussion here is that there's, content that makes people angry is more likely to get amplified. And I've certainly noticed that myself, even on Twitter, which is, I turn off the recommendations every time I remember and have everything to be, temporally sorted. But also, if you have something that is popular enough, you tend to cross a threshold where it goes from being shared with your ideal audience, the people you're talking to, and instead gets shared with people outside of that audience who may then become abusive. So there's sort of like a sweet spot of being viral where up to a certain point, it's like cool. And then after that, it tends to have more negative than positive effects. So I think she said like around 30,000 views seems to be sort of the sweet spot from her research. So, yeah, it's also just interesting because, so obviously TikTok is more prevalent with younger users, and I do sort of wonder about the influence of algorithmic content recommendation, the algorithm, as it is colloquially referred to, on particularly, we know from research on Facebook, on YouTube, for example, that, YouTube will push you towards polarizing extremist content if left to its own devices very, very easily. You have to sort of actively curate what you are watching and what you remove from your search history to avoid that. And if your sort of default assumption is that you're just going to continue to get recommended things, then how does that affect your interaction with content? How does that affect your life and livelihood and mental well-being? I think those are open questions that I don't have the answer to, but Osmo says, how's this related to machine learning and NLP? This is not meant to be criticizing. I was just confused about the Twitch stream title because it seems more political. Maybe you talk more about sociological, political implications of these technologies. Great question. So, content recommendation is a machine learning task. And in this case, the interaction of that machine learning product with the users is the sort of the focus here. However, we also do talk about things based on sections, and we are currently in the ethics section. And before that, we were in the politics section. And before that was sort of like the more general machine learning stuff. So we talked about sort of professional practical stuff, and then we start the stream with research. So we sort of get, less narrowly focused on just technical stuff over the course of the stream. So at this point, yes, we are more talking about sort of societal implications of the work. So it's a good work. It's a good question. I did not take it as rude. We are also, started at 10. It's now 1. We're 3 hours into the stream. So we've covered quite a bit. But anyway, just something I'm thinking about. Also, if you're interested in socio-technical systems and, tech ethics and the law, Casey is a great person to follow. She's done a lot of work in the area. Actually, I signed one of her papers to my NLP ethics class as well recently. All right. And I'm just going to read this with no comment. So this is from Motherboard by Vice. Ring cameras are going to get more people killed. And it's by Edward Ongweso Jr. And it was published October 24th. 2 Florida men allegedly shot an innocent woman 7 times after Ring surveillance camera alerts, police say. So this was not just that they saw someone through the camera. This was a person who was flagged by the camera, right? So there was an alert sent as a result of, you know, some sort of machine learning system being procced, and obviously, you know, the system is not solely responsible, but it certainly played a part, which is not great. Yep. So as a pull quote from here, they go out searching for a burglar that wasn't there and shot up an innocent lady's car while she was in it. That's crazy. So apparently the woman had, she believed she was being carjacked, and she, let's see, I'm just gonna read the paper. Cognition said, did the ring flag the person as suspicious or just tell them someone was there when they weren't expecting that? I'm not entirely sure. So I'm reading through now. A neighbor stopped by the front door to drop off prescription medication and accidentally delivered it to the wrong address. The Ring surveillance camera began bombarding their phones with alerts. They grabbed guns, went outside and found a woman sitting in her car on her phone. They told her to get out of her car. She thought she was getting hijacked, and then she was shot by them. And then there's an example here of from England where someone did see someone breaking into his house through a Ring surveillance camera and then went home and stabbed one of the burglars to death. And the man who did the stabbing was later found guilty of manslaughter and jailed for 19 years. Some may claim that the surveillance camera had nothing to do with this incident. A small but vocal contingent on Twitter insisted the Ring surveillance cameras are not implicated because of the humans, not the tech, shot the handguns. Some replied that this was a mental health issue, although no details were released to suggest this. Given the popularity of Ring cameras, it's not unreasonable to assume a lot of people view Ring surveillance cameras this way. Yes, so I think that they got alerts. I don't know that they necessarily got tagged that there was an issue. But certainly it's a UX decision, right, to send a lot of alerts about someone at the door. And I don't know that this is like, I think mostly people are not designing Ring cameras around people with guns who would love to shoot somebody, but who own the camera, perhaps obviously. But given that they are selling it to Americans, they probably should. More relevant to the Florida case is Ring's well-documented pattern of cultivating paranoia to sell cameras. So this, I think, is a direct product decision by the company. Amazon's Ring is powered by the Neighbors app, a virtual neighborhood watch that encourages people to racially profile, spy on, and snitch on their, quote, suspicious neighbors, which shares Ring surveillance footage with police departments. And I will say, if you have that footage shared with police departments, you may not know that it is happening. Amazon has a long history of just handing police departments surveillance camera footage, basically just because they asked. Rachel, what about the Fourth Amendment? Well, what about it? Good question. Yes. In July of last year, 48 civil rights and advocacy groups sent a letter to the Federal Trade Commission asking it to ban corporate surveillance of public spaces, specifically because Amazon uses it as a part of a strategy to shore up its economic empire. Pervasive surveillance was key to part of its monopolies, but at great cost to our politics, social relations, and economy. Is the cost worth the minor conveniences? Yeah, Cognition says, oh, geez, yeah. So, yep, I think this is great advice. You can always throw your surveillance camera away or talk to your friends and loved ones and neighbors about getting rid of theirs. I don't think that they increase safety in any appreciable way. There's, you know, they think there's been more research done on particularly surveillance in school settings that, you know, a lot of times these very strict surveillance regimens are sold to school systems with the idea that they will prevent violence against students. Unfortunately, the research evidence seems to suggest that it does not work, right? So, yep. I would also say throw away your Ring camera. That's it. And of course, even if the camera itself is not like the reason, it's certainly, I don't know if you can hear my dog or not. It certainly played a role. All right. Next up, so we're talking again about sort of labor issues around data labeling, and this one is rough. This is very rough. I am not gonna scroll down, but I'm going to scroll down enough so you can see the byline. So this is from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. It was published October 20th, and it is by Niamh McIntyre, Niamh, Rosie Bradbury, and Billy Perigo, perhaps? I mean, I think there are, unfortunately, and I think, online content pushing extremism and selling people things based on paranoia is definitely part of it. There are a not insignificant number of people in the United States who, again, have guns and are looking for excuses to use them on people, just to be very blunt about it. And that is a fact of the country that I live in. I'm from the US, if you did not know. I could be Canadian. I feel like I sound pretty USian, but I could be Canadian. Anyway, so also speaking about sort of AI and ethics, Carnation says, the point about Ring cultivating paranoia, presumably as a banal marketing strategy, is chilling to me. Yes. I mean, I think that we have ample evidence at this point that Amazon is perfectly willing to trade people's lives for money. Very directly, right? So I think we talked about it a little while ago, but as far as I know, they have not stopped selling, children the means to end their lives. Let me put it that way. Which is, even though they knew that they were doing it and continued to do it based on the advice of their lawyers. And I have a hard time thinking of anything more cartoonishly evil than an online retailer could do, but I'm sure they've done it. Anyway, yeah, not that they're uniquely guilty of that particular trade-off. No, I think they're just especially brazen about it. Yeah. Yeah, I hate to tell you, Robbie, but there are gun violence in schools in the United States is unfortunately extremely common. Anyway, content moderation. So this is a story on TikTok's content moderation, and I'll leave you to look it up if you would like. It is, as you can see, the content warning, very distressing. But basically, for removing, violent, sexually abusive. Imagine the most horrible thing someone would film. For removing that content, TikTok uses human content moderators. And the reason that they do not use a machine learning system for this is because it is more expensive to try and train a system than it is to just use human labor. And that human labor, of course, very, very poorly paid, and at a huge psychological cost to the workers who are doing this. And this is a situation where I think that, the use of a machine learning system could potentially save human suffering. What would save even more human suffering is not having TikTok. But, I understand it also brings people, joy and delight and anxiety, all of those things together. We just talked about it. I don't think it's unique to TikTok. I think any sort of, algorithm-based content curation and recommendation system is going to have much the same issues if they're targeting engagement. But yeah, so very, very distressing article. Obviously, huge content warning. Read at your own risk. And I I think this is a place where, in theory, if we could get a system that was good enough, it would help. And it would help in particular these content moderators, but it's not there. And so we are asking people to do this without enough support for the, financial benefit of a company. Anyway. Have I ever been to New York, 153rd Street? I don't think so. I've only been to New York once or twice. It is not my favorite place. All right. Oh, next up. I don't know that I have the mental fortitude to talk about this, but basically, so this is by MIT Tech Review, The Messy Morality of Letting AI Make Life and Death Decisions. It's by Will Douglas Heaven. I think it's the second thing we've read by him, actually, published October 13th, so it's a little bit older. And basically, this is a machine that allows someone to end their own life. And one of the things that the creator of the machine is interested in adding into it is a questionnaire that would then be graded by AI, basically, to determine whether or not someone was, making the decision of their own free will. I don't think that's a thing that you can automate. And I don't think it's a thing that we should automate. Specifically, the, determining whether or not this is something somebody should do. And then, this is the final one in the ethics section. This is from the MIT Tech Review, again by Karen Howe. And this is a little bit older, but I think it's a good reference. So I'm not going to go into it too deeply, but I am going to share the link. This is how AI bias really happens and why it's so hard to fix. Bias can creep in at many stages of the deep learning process, and the standard practices in computer science aren't designed to detect it. And I would say that's still definitely the case. However, given that there's now more and more government pushing towards auditing, particularly for uses in high impact areas like we just talked about with New York, with hiring recommendations, I think we're going to see more and more discussion of this in sort of the general public sphere. So I will to pop this in the chat if you would like to trade it off. If you would like to read it off, I think it is a good article. Oh, that's it. We're on to the fun. Whew. Whew. What a stream. I always like to end on a little bit of a high note. Because again, we talk about a lot of heavy stuff, and it can't all be doom and gloom all the time. All right. So first of all, I just have some fun. Some fun language errors today. This is by Emma S. Manning, who is a linguist at Google, and it is a screenshot from a Google search, and the search term is "How long has Theresa May been PM?" So Prime Minister, and the response is Theresa May's height, which is 1.27 trillion picometers. Long here, I think, has been sort of like misidentified by some sort of like fuzzy stochastic language model, probably based process, to be how long is she as a person, not how long has she held that position. Also, it's given her height, and it's given her height in a buck wild unit. Nobody measures people in picometers. That's ridiculous. So very funny error. No human would ever do this. It is very silly that it has done it. Cognition says too long. Yes, if you are not familiar, the UK just got a new prime minister and then just lost that new prime minister and now is getting another new one. So big old dealings over there in prime minister land. And this is another, I would call this a machine learning error. So this is from Pritz Holznagel, who is an Emmy winner and also a Jeopardy winner, who I know, a former colleague of mine, and also just a pretty cool guy. Definitely one you want on your side in a pub quiz, no questions. If you are ever in a position to have him on your team, take it immediately. So this is a sort of word puzzle where you have a number of characters, and I believe you need to have potentially 2 characters before and 2 characters after the middle character. The middle character is a V, and the options for characters to put around it are CON, D-I-N-D, and as it turns out, COVID is not in the word list. So this is obviously an out-of-vocabulary error due to language change over time. Presumably, the word list that they are using was compiled before, say, 2020. It has not been updated. So funny error that you can sort of like see behind the... certainly I can look at this and understand why it's happening, but as a user, I imagine extremely frustrated. Yeah. Elton says, wow. Yep. Yeah. And then next up, another very funny error due to poor product design. So this is a tweet from Paul Ford at FTrain. On Twitter, my son is 11 and got an Apple Watch, but can never close his rings because he put his height in as 5'9", and thus the watch doesn't believe he ever stands up. We can't figure out how to change it. Genuine tragedy. So if you're not familiar with Apple Watch, I'm not something I would use, but they have like little activity monitors, and if you do the activity, it increases the length around the ring, and if you close your ring, you have finished your assigned activity for the day. However, he is not in fact 5'9", and so the watch never goes high enough that the system believes that he has stood up. So it never, believes that he has been standing, and it doesn't seem to be fixable. You can probably reset the device, I would hope, right? Like you could like factory reset it, but that's quite the thing to do, and it sounds like it's not very clear about how to do it to these folks. So again, funny error. Poor kid. Not something the system expected to happen. Cognition says it uses your input height as its metric for standing. Apparently. Yep. How does the watch measure height? I would guess, I'm going to preface this by saying I am not a hardware person, but some of my friends are sensor people. My guess is that it can measure sort of like distance moved using perhaps a gyroscope? Or maybe it can measure like velocity and time, and from that they can calculate distance. And so it measures like the distance of the movement, and based on, I'm assuming, sort of norming data they have from like physiological databases or whatever, they, if you are sitting, here you are, and you are standing, there you are, and just sort of like, if you are this height, then it should be this much movement. So I would guess, again, not a systems person, if I had an Apple Watch I could play, I would guess if he vigorously raised his hand from waist height to above his head, potentially it would recognize that as standing. Another thing is it may be looking for like both, distance and also sort of like a gait pattern, possibly. I don't know what the sensors are like in there, but that's my guess. If anyone has more information, feel free to weigh in. Not really my core area of expertise. And this, I didn't see this comment before, but it's very funny. This is from account at Meatsock. Ticket closed. Customer height will increase eventually. That's very funny. All right, and finally, we have one thing that is in no way related to machine learning, so apology, OSW 3009. I just thought this was cool. So this is from Virginia Mercury, one of my favorite local Virginia news articles, and it is by Megan McIntyre, published October 25th, and it is, the cover photo is a man with his hands on his hips standing in front of a bunch of sacks of acorns, and the title is, one man has collected more than 8,000 pounds of acorns for Virginia, which is a wild number of acorns. If any of you don't live where oak trees are one of the primary sort of like overstory trees in the eastern woodlands, which is our biological, geographic region here in Virginia. And they're quite small. They're about the size of usually I would use an acorn as a size reference, but they can be between the size of like a toothpaste cap and, I don't know what's acorn sized. I don't have any with me on my desk. I do have they're about this size. This is actually a pecan or a hickory nut. It's not actually an acorn, but they can be about that size. they're very small. They do not fall all at once, and you have to pick them up off the ground. So he's been going around picking up acorns, over 8,000 pounds of them. And the reason that he's collecting them is for a forestry project. So the Virginia Department of, let's see. The Virginia Department of Forestry has state-run nurseries where they plant these to make seedlings, and it's like he's been doing it for over 13 years, and it's the old reverse Johnny Appleseed, I guess, collecting native species to replant. So, good job, Mark Ordemeyer. You're helping out the Commonwealth. So, he says issue is self-regarding. How many picograms is that? Many trillion, I'd imagine. Yeah. Alexi says, I remember people would attach smart bands to their pets to get a lot of steps. I was trying to compete with some cat using a Samsung watch. Oh no. Yeah. Robbie says, if I'm buying an Apple Watch, I'd probably have to mention my details to the Apple Watch seller. So I think that when you set up the device, it sounds like you get a chance to enter your biometric details for, it to work. Although, you know what? I applaud that kid for data poisoning. Absolutely lie. Absolutely lie when people ask you, when a company asks you for your biometric details you don't want to give up. So, also he says, in my area, all the squirrels collect them by themselves. Yeah, they are something like, there's something wild. I don't remember off the top of my head, but something like 80% of the calories that like a squirrel will consume in a year come from acorns. They are enormous food producers, and they are edible by humans. They just not the most delicious tasting, I would say. And the ones that are especially delicious tasting, so there's two like main varieties of oaks. There's white oaks and red oaks here in the US. I don't know if this is global. And the red oaks have lots of tannins and sort of like drop their acorns every year, and they taste awful. And the white oaks, who have less tannins, usually have like 2-year mast cycles, and then there's like a 1 week period where the white oaks go poof, drop everything, and they taste delicious. So they sprout immediately as well. So you get like the sprouting right away, whereas the red oaks don't usually sprout until the spring. Tree talk. I would say that amateur forestry is one of my many interests. I think trees are cool, and I'm a big fan. Yeah, also interesting thing. So we're not entirely sure about the genetic determinants of taste in oaks, but they don't breed true, right? So if you have like a really, people talk about like sweet oaks. So some oaks don't produce any or very few tannins, and they taste the most delicious. But an oak that tastes delicious, or from a tree that tastes delicious, is not necessarily going to breed true and also grow an oak that also tastes delicious, which definitely makes, if we wanted to raise them as a commercial food species, would make it very difficult. So mostly the only people in the US who eat acorns are weird foragers, no comment, and also, of course, indigenous people who are practicing their traditional food ways. Sometimes it's just nice to talk about things that are not computer science, I'll tell you what. So, that's all I have for you today. It's been 3.5 hours. My voice is going. I am so hungry. But Alexi says AI is secretly a squirrel, so acorns are interesting for AI. I would warrant the average squirrel is, more performant than the average AI system. Well, Absuno says interesting. Oh, good. I'm glad I haven't scared you away with my tree facts. Before I wrap up, I do want to say great big thank you to everyone who supports me as a monthly coffee supporter. I really appreciate you. I mentioned earlier I still have not paid myself, which continues to be true, but it is more or less covering the expenses for the business at this point, which is fabulous, and I genuinely appreciate. So thank you to all of you, those of you in the stream. Thank you. I appreciate you. And LexX Tom, extra big shout out for being the newest member. I really appreciate. So, yeah, thank you for joining, Gustavo. Thank you for your time. That's all I've got for today. We'll be back next Tuesday for something. I don't know. I'll figure it out. I usually post about it the day before. It'll be on Twitter. It'll be on this channel. It'll be at the same Twitch where y'all are. So. Thank you for joining. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.